Good evening and welcome to Speaker's Corner UK. We're back with another review. This time it's the Answering Atheists Part 2, Deciphering Darwinian Delusions. We're only going to do the first part of this, which we hope is the intro plus the interaction with J. Mike. There were some other atheists came on. This was about a week ago, so we're a little bit behind at the moment. And here we're going to listen into what they believe. There isn't a conflict between science and God, quote unquote. Stops has got something he wants to read first. So, Stops, if you want to go ahead with that.
Yeah, because I started this thing. Good evening, everybody. Now, the title is Deciphering Darwinian Delusion, but they seem to bounce around, changing title, changing the concept, changing everything. So I don't know what this is actually about. I wasn't even aware that there was a part one, because there is no Answering Atheist part one. There's just another thing on this Hamza's Den thing, and that's it. Now, Hamza is making a lot of noise, okay, causing drama, which will undoubtedly attract gullible Muslims who see some sort of confirmation for their weak belief, which is, well, we all know, buckling under the current bombardment with reality. Now, there's little to no information in what he delivers, so a stream on atheist science and evolution is a demonstration of lacking understanding of atheist science and evolution, I'm sorry to say. People like me who know Islam and the usual apologetics are blocked from participating, since I would, I think, totally ruin their smug and arrogant attitude by confronting them with reality, which they can't handle. So instead of learning and updating their knowledge level, they rather block me because it's much easier. Instead of learning about Darwin, his theory, and the resulting explanations, a person like Subur will use Google not to learn something, but to find people, usually fundamentalist Christians, who voice some sort of criticism when it comes to the theory of evolution. Now, we need to understand that we have evolution, which happens, but the explanation, the display, the whole, I don't know, summary of what we understand evolution to be is then summarized in the theory of evolution. And you need to differentiate between the two of them. But because Supur does not have the necessary background education, he does not comprehend what these people are saying in the theory of evolution and those people that are creating the papers on this. And he simply provides quote mines, which shows he does not understand what he's doing, and sometimes even uses quotes in a way that they demonstrate the opposite of what he's trying to do. Now, I've fact-checked him on numerous occasions and found he simply fabricates stuff. You know, if it sounds nice to him and it appears to be knowledgeable when talking to people, then he takes it. But it only works with general knowledge, school level, yeah? And yet
I lost
it
you
is
there. Are you back? Oh, there you go.
And yet it is amazingly easy for me to demonstrate the dishonesty and lack of any substantial knowledge in the arguments made by Subur. What is worse than listening to these uneducated Islam apologists is seeing the reaction of Muslims watching this, who lap up everything said here without thinking, checking, or challenging even the most egregious mistakes. And people who write comments based on reason and skepticism are quickly blocked until only the sycophants remain, creating an echo chamber consisting of fans only, ignorant bigots who have no critical thinking capability and no education on the topic at hand. So going to the video itself, Hamza, within the first minute, already shows he did not understand anything that he was told, also by myself, about biological evolution and the impact on his creator God. It's sad and unfortunate. Now, it was very clear, and repeated this several times, biological evolution has no impact on whether I believe gods or goddesses can exist or do exist. Biological evolution, as observed here on this planet, has no impact of gods and goddesses in general, but on the local gods, like the Islamic creator God, and those gods using Adam and Eve as proto-humans. Those cannot exist and are disproven by the theory of evolution. I think this is clear and can't really be misinterpreted, yet Hamza manages to misrepresent me anyway. And then after 3 minutes, someone shown as J Mike shows up in the comments and asks to be part of the discussion, but is ignored. And we will see now what happens when he is allowed to speak much later. That's what I got as the first couple of intro remarks that I wrote down.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much. So with that, we're going to jump into the video itself, and we'll go through it, stop it at various points, and give our thoughts on
We'll
this.
just put in the chat, this doesn't work, there's no formatting. Because these are the timestamps if somebody's interested in the people when they arrive and what happens.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll only get through the first
Yeah.
person anyway, so we'll see how that goes. All right, so let's get started. I've got some notes here, but because this was all last minute, I've written a lot, but I've got them in my editing software and not written out, because as I was going through, I was making notes. So we'll see how we get on. Okay, here we go. Let me just share it first, obviously. Go to full screen. There we go. And here we go.
Wa alaikum salam. I love the intro.
You like that? Hey, I thought it had to be apt, didn't it, man? Alhamdulillah. Well, welcome to the den again.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. It was really eventful last time. And I think what we're going to do today, we're going to dig down deeper, piece by piece, rather than abstracting it. Because we ended up with atheists coming on, what we're talking about, and all this kind of business, yeah? So we want to make sure that any atheists are tuned in right now. What we'd like you to do, because I'm basically going to ask and have a kind of conversation with Brother Sabur. We're going to talk about science. We're going to talk about Darwinian evolution, and we're going to talk about how Muslims should respond when evolution when the atheist pulls out the evolution card as if it's some kind of mic drop moment. We had atheists coming on last time, 3 of them confirming that the Darwinian evolution doesn't undermine the existence of a creator.
Yep.
And they were all saying, no, we don't say this, we don't say this. But we know atheists do say this. Yeah. So we're going to...
Yeah, we've both dealt with this before. We've done it in other previous reviews. What atheists typically say. You said it. T-Jump said it. I can't remember who the third person was. They all said that it may not... they didn't use these particular words, but basically what the view was is that it doesn't undermine some sort of deist God, but if it's a particular theist God that has a book where it says Adam and Eve were brought into existence by God, ex nihilo, that sort of thing, where they didn't have common ancestors, then Darwinian evolution at least... disproves that. Those two are in conflict. And I've asked this question on the show as well, and we didn't get a straightforward answer, except from Abbas, and the others didn't seem to want to agree. So this is a side claim. It's not the main claim. What they should be saying is, hey, does common descent, evolution by common descent, does that undermine the Quranic view of special creation by God? And of course the answer is yes, but instead of doing that, they superimpose it onto some sort of unspecified God, and that's a trivial point. Nobody's interested in that, as Stops has pointed out in his intro, and as we've said many times as well.
We're going to address that today, inshallah. The comment section, you're just going to have to get on amongst yourselves. I'm sure the mods are going to be there doing their thing, and then inshallah, as usual, once we've finished, we'll bring on the atheists to try and respond to what's been said. Dr. Imran, inshallah, is running a little bit late. MashaAllah, it's COVID time right now and he's a bit run off his feet, but he'll be joining us hopefully in the next half an hour, inshallah. I better send him the link, actually. I send him the link. I'll do that now. All right, so Sabur, how do you want to do this?
Bismillah. Well, I think what's very important is that before we speak about anything, we go to the foundation. So let's first speak about why are we talking about Darwinism? Then we'll go into, well, Darwinism is a scientific theory, so what does science actually give you? Does science give you absolute truth? What's the philosophy of science? What is it based on? And then we'll look into, okay, what is Darwinism? And what is evolution? And what is the theory based upon? And then we'll look into, well, is it as solid as what's being proposed? And then in the end, we will go to the implications of the theory, the religious element of it, the political element of it, the ethical element of it, and the sort of existential implications which have had a huge impact in terms of world history. So we'll go through this chronology, but the main thing to keep in mind right from the beginning is that what we want to do is we want atheists to challenge everything that we're saying. So we're not just here preaching to the converted.
Well, we'll see whether that's the case. I mean, it's all very good to give lip service to this, but if you want them to challenge it, then you've really got to listen to what they say, steel man their position, be charitable, and actually have an honest discussion. And we will see later on that these words here are just said and very quickly forgotten. So let's not take this particular statement very much with a pinch of salt, because it'll be demonstrated later that in fact you don't really want that. You've got your own narrative, you're preaching to your choir, in fact when you're saying you're not, and your attempt is to, quote, roast people, and you'll use that exact word later on in this very discussion that we will hopefully get to tonight.
And the question I'm asking, why is it that I am blocked?
Yeah, well, they don't have a good answer to that one.
If you feel there's anything you disagree with, put it in the comment section. We'll highlight the comment and we'll answer it. And once this is over, this conversation, then it'll be a Royal Rumble, right? Whoever wants to come in, whoever wants to discuss, whoever
Bring
wants
it. My sleeves are already up.
Okay, but listen to this, right?
me.
It's a Royal Rumble. Put my sleeves up. Is that how you're going to have an intellectually honest discussion? Does anybody else?
Me.
Well, yeah, exactly. Right. Maybe you're like Hulk Hogan. You've won the WWF so many times that you're now disqualified. But the whole thing, right, this isn't really an intellectually honest discussion. You don't hear other people saying this, or most other people don't say this. Right? They want to have an interesting discussion. Not these guys. They're in here for the, quote, rumble, to see if they can get one over, to try and make a trivial point, hoping that the gullible audience will pick it all up and think that they've said something substantial.
Yeah, but this is what
I'm
I
sure
call
you're ready.
causing drama.
Well, that's what their viewers want, right? Most of their viewers can't follow some of the more intricate points anyway, and so what they really want is to make it, they want to feel good that their guys look like they're winning, even if they couldn't explain at any point what it is that they've said that's substantial. And that's the way to find out whether somebody is paying attention or knows what's being said.
Ready as well. Okay. So let's start with science, because I have a lot of comments in the YouTube channel, on TikTok and on Facebook, and the atheists say things like, we have science, you have faith, as if it's some kind of it's science versus faith. So religious people only have faith and the atheists have science. Now, I'm pretty sure that's not true, is it? The atheists don't have the science is not the atheist's ace card, if you like.
Yeah, I think, Hamza, that's a very good point you raised. If you remember, like going back to the park a few years ago, if you remember, you used to have this 5-step thing about how a society which accepts these 5 parameters of Islam will benefit, right? You used to have these 5 values. I don't remember exactly what they are, but
the 5 poisons you're referring to.
Sorry?
You talk about the 5 poisons, about the alcohol, the gambling, the sexual morality, and how the leaders of society encourage and condone them. Yeah,
exactly. So what you were basically referring to were values, positive or negative, which impact society. So the first thing we must realize is Islam came with values which facilitated and generated the modern inductive scientific method. This is very
Okay, so let's just see if we understand this. According to Sabur, he's not answering the question about science particularly at this moment. He's gone off on a tangent here. But according to him, Islam brought about these values that gave us the modern inductive method. Right? Let's see if he remotely provides an argument for that incredible claim.
This is very important to understand. So the culture that was created from the time of the Prophet ﷺ and then on to the time of the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Mughals, the Ottomans, this facilitated scientific discovery. And this is not something I'm just making a claim of. There's historians who've actually spoken about how the modern inductive scientific method, which is what we use today, that's the method. So if you look at this live stream, look at StreamYard, look at all of the various platforms that we use and all of the technologies we have.
Can you just stop? Sorry, because this is going to get lost, I think. He is saying that there are multiple historians who say this. I don't know one historian who does. I don't know a single historian who will go and say that everything in science was facilitated by Islam like 1400 years ago. No, nobody's saying this.
Or even the inductive method,
the
right?
opposite.
Well, even the inductive method, because he's going to make a claim later that Al-Haytham was the, quote, inventor, discoverer, whatever term you wish to use, of the inductive method. But yes, he's making a more broad claim now, which will be, he'll kind of not walk back the claim, but he'll narrow the claim down a bit later on. But again, like you say, provide the evidence. And even if a historian says so, why should we believe that? Right. And this is, of course, one of his tactics. That is, I'm going to quote historians. I'm going to quote people that sound like they're authorities, And I might cherry pick or quote mine a particular quote out of their book, hoping that nobody else has read the book, or that there aren't massive responses to that sort of thing, as if, it's a one-sided thing and it's just a given that this is the case. And so, no, I agree with you. I'm atheist according to this term. I dismiss this term if and until there's substantial evidence, not just from one or two cherry-picked quote historians where you take something, but it can be demonstrated that Islam gave rise, because that's the claim, Islam gave rise to this somehow. Whatever Islam is, this nebulous term suddenly gave rise. Does he mean that Allah did it? Did it do it through certain people? If Islam hadn't come about, what is it? The inductive method wouldn't have been discovered. What is the actual claim? You're right. It's this sort of really vague claim, which there isn't any substantive evidence for, at least at this stage.
We have in the world, they're all essentially based upon the scientific method. That's how we discovered how things work and how things don't work, and what the interconnection is.
Again,
can I ask a question at this point, Dan?
This is terrible. I don't understand. He says that atheists are the champions of science. Now, my question is immediately, well, what options are there? If you are looking at nature, if you are looking at lightning, what is at your disposal to go and evaluate and dissect, investigate and describe what lightning is? How many options are there? Of course, you can go to the Quran and say, well, it's God, or you can go to another book which says it's Zeus or something. But these are just claims. It's only science which actually gives you the reason behind it, the whole description, and not just the why, but the how. The religious books don't do that. The next thing is, he says that the scientific method, he does not understand what the scientific method is. He doesn't know what the scientific method is used for. It is not used to, because he thinks that a scientific method is you publishing a book or publishing a paper which is then peer-reviewed. He does not understand that this is just one step in the scientific method. But for him, this is all there is. So he does not understand anything that he is talking about. This is the problem. And he is pretending as though he is the champion here. And if he mentions the scientific method, everybody is supposed to know what he's talking about. Well, I'm sorry, I do not. But as soon as you describe it, I can clearly hear that you are not talking about the scientific method the way that it is intended to be, but only as publishing a paper. And that's it. So there are multiple misconceptions here and multiple mistakes here already in the beginning.
That I'm pretty sure atheists will be screaming at their screens. Yeah. So, because obviously you go back to the Greeks, you go back to Aristotle's and Galen's and all of these things. So what was the difference between their science and the inductive method that is used today?
That is a brilliant question. Now, the Greeks, they used to use what we could call today proto-science. So their methodology was a bit haphazard. So it wasn't the sort of rigorous scientific methodology we have today. So what we get with the Greeks is we get theorization, and we also have this type of philosophy where observations are being used to reconfirm the theory that you have. So you have a theory in mind, and that theory, to reconfirm it, you look at the data, right? Now, when Hassan ibn Haytham came about 1,000 years ago.
Do you see what I mean? He does not understand the scientific method. No, you do not start out with a theory and then look to confirm it. That is definitely 100% not the way that science works. And he does not understand it. He is looking at it like a theist would at the Quran. I've got the Quran, I've got a sentence. Now how do I go and look for evidence to confirm this? And this is exactly the wrong way around.
Years ago, obviously before him were the Greeks. And what he proposed is something different, which is a rigorous scientific method, which included not just trying to reverse engineer observations into your theory, but falsification, trying to prove your theory wrong, right? So what we find is something actually very interesting, which is that even non-Muslim Western historians have actually spoken about how Hassan ibn Haytham was extremely important when it comes to science.
Yeah, who did, and what exactly did they say, right? This is the sort of vagaries that aren't in any way mentioned. And so it's left to the viewer to just accept it, or to go and look these things up. And I'll just read you something here quickly, or I won't share my screen because I've got to stop and share it here. So let me quickly say something. So this is off Wikipedia. He's referred to as the father of modern optics. He made significant contributions to the principles of optics and visual perception in particular. Building upon a naturalistic empirical method pioneered by Aristotle in ancient Greece, Al-Haytham was an early proponent of the concept of a hypothesis that must be supported by experiments based on confirmable procedures or mathematical evidence. An early pioneer of the scientific method 5 centuries before the Renaissance scientist. Al-Haytham was dubbed the second Ptolemy and paved the way for modern science in physical optics. It doesn't say anything about the inductive method there, or in fact that he provided a falsification there. Now, he may well have done this, but again, all they're saying is that somebody, even if we granted everything that was said here, all they're saying is that somebody else came along before, but there's going to be a bigger claim that's going to be made, which is that it's not possible. It's not possible for Western philosophy to have come about had it not been for Al-Haytham. And so, obviously, we don't have this, and he's not quoting the scientists or what they say, so we can go and fact check it. With Sabur, the number one thing you've got to do is fact check. It's like you've got to be on a disbelief at the. I think disbelief is the default position with him. And if you want to be agnostic and like ultra charitable, then you can be agnostic on it.
And his importance is to do with actually induction. Yeah.
So where is this? Can you provide the evidence? I've just read it off there. I had a look on Wikipedia. We can look elsewhere. Where is it that his importance is to do with induction? I had a look for this. I couldn't find anything to do with that. I haven't looked in every book, but I had a look to see if there's anything around that. On the contrary, Francis Bacon is credited with being an inductivist, at least if not inventing it, but certainly it seems that way, and we can read about that. Certainly was a big, staunch opponent of that moved that massively forward. So that's very clear from the bit that I read on Francis Bacon. There's nothing clear about that with Al-Haytham.
So the modern inductive method that we have today, it actually goes back to him. Now, something else to keep in mind is what we need to understand about the history of science. It's not like one person comes along and changes everything and it all started due to one person.
Oh, hang on a moment. So it's not because one person came along and changed everything. Let's keep that phrase in mind, please. Do keep that phrase in mind.
An ongoing process, but
it's an ongoing process as well. Okay, so let's just keep those two things in mind and see whether that, in fact, is a consistent theme throughout this.
The ongoing process is actually something which started a long time ago, but Hassan ibn Haytham is a point of inflection. He's somebody who came up with this rigorous method, which actually led to a massive exponential growth in scientific knowledge, right?
Okay, well, where's the evidence there was a massive scientific growth in exponential knowledge? Where's that?
So, and the other thing is, he just said there's not a single person who did this, and now he's saying, well, yeah, but he did.
Yeah. And again, we don't see this, right? He is the father of modern optics. We can accept that, right? But I think he's crediting far too much. He's inferring far too much with no information that we can find. And he's not providing any sources. And if he's got his laptop there, he would easily be able to tell us the book, the scientists, where they said this, and most importantly, why.
And he's called the father of modern optics because Muslims like calling him that. You need to look a little bit deeper. You need to actually read the text that he brought up. You need to look at the drawings that he made. All he did, and this is remarkable. I mean, he was a polymath. He was a remarkable guy, really brilliant. But what he did in actual fact is just advance the knowledge that existed. What he did is he made drawings of what the people, even the old Greeks, had already spoken about. All he managed to do is put this onto paper, which the Greeks did not manage to do. So this is not a revolution. This is evolution. This is just another step. It's an ongoing process. It's exactly what he says. Al-Haytham is not this wonder kid who changed the paradigm of science or something. That's utter nonsense. I mean, if you go, I read the text. I really went and looked at them. There's nothing so great. The same with Khwarizmi. I don't know if he goes into this. They always say, yeah, he invented algebra. There is not a single algebraic formula in any book that he brought up. He just advanced it. So all these people did was advance the existing knowledge, which was great, but it's not a revolution.
Yeah.
Historians like Bradley Stevens, who actually calls him the first scientist, right? So what's important to understand
I would
is
love
that
to go.
Greek
I would
science,
love to go look at Bradley Stevens and check, does he really say this? Because every time I fact check Zubur, I find out, no, what he is saying is absolute. Actually, let me write that down for later. Can you just go 2 seconds back?
Bradley Stevens. Bradley Stevens. I'm just
Write
writing it
that
down
down.
myself here.
Because I want to check this later.
Yeah, go and have a look at Bradley Stevens. Does he say this? And if he does, why does he say it? Is it his personal opinion? Is it a majority view? And if it is, what's the evidence for that? What is it that makes that the case? But it's even more than that, Stops. Let's say we grant that this guy changed the face of science, which of course Sabur just earlier said that didn't happen, but let's assume that a contradiction is okay. And in fact, he was this amazing guy, without whom the scientific method wouldn't have moved forward. I mean, that's just if Mount Everest is a claim, this is to the sun and back claim, right? But let's assume that this was the case. The question is, so what? And we will hear later on, and that's where we're going to stop to really scratch our heads in amazement, right? Because there's going to be an inference about this later on as to why this is so important, which isn't being done now. So let's say that, like you said, you've read into it deeper than most people have, and it's something that he's moved forward, but it's not as remarkable, anywhere near as remarkable as Sabur is making up. But even if it is, so what, right? So that's the question we're going to hang in there. So what if that's the case, right? Let's see what a little bit later on, what the bridge is, the invisible bridge that he's going to attempt to build about this. I think we're going to sort of scratch our heads here in amazement that somebody can build an invisible bridge. But again, if you believe that the Quran is from God, then I think building invisible bridges is apparently quite easy.
science and what the Muslims did is totally distinct. It's not the same thing.
And the methodology used by science today is the same one that the Muslims originated with.
It's built upon that. So obviously, philosophy of science.
Notice him as well, right? He wants to take an even stronger position than even Sabur's unsubstantiated strong position. Hamza wants to take an even stronger position than that, right? He wants to go and say no, because that's his style, right? I'll take it that's something that's somewhere, and I'm just going to change that to make as if it's the done thing. It's a open and shut case, right? So again, we've got to be aware of the tactic here, that even he wants to go further than Sabur, because that's his whole thing, right? Because this is propaganda. This isn't about the truth. This isn't about being intellectually honest, nuanced. This is about a steamrolling effect where you can make massive claims knowing that your audience will never go look this up, and they will think of you as the lion of Speaker's Corner in their gullibility and their ignorance. And so you just got to know what's going on here. What's the tactics? These guys are not here to convince you and I or any other critically thinking person. That's not their aim. Their aim is to keep the gullible happy and for them to be put on a pedestal as guys that are supposedly knowledgeable. That's the whole thing that's going on here. Anything else is just lip service, as we heard in the beginning.
It wasn't as developed, obviously, back then time now. And the thing about the scientific method as well, which is extremely important for us to understand, is that the scientific method is not anything related to militant naturalism or atheism, right? So today...
Okay, so let's just remember this as well, right? The science is not related to atheism, militant, whatever that's supposed to mean. This is just his subjective term. But science is not related to atheism. Right, we won't get to it in this part, but in fact, that's the claim that Monkfish makes in a later thing, and he said he did not make this claim. I looked this up specifically for that, because that was one of the claims that was made. And of course, let me just, what are we on there? That is 8:36. I'm just going to go back just a few seconds here so we can hear that again.
Anything related to militant naturalism or atheism, right? So today...
So science isn't related to militant atheism, whatever that is, or just atheism, right? So let's remember that he's saying it's not related to it. In other words, that if you want to change the word slightly, which is the claim that Dawkins made, which is you can be an intellectually satisfied atheist if evolution is true. He's suggesting no, that's not the case, right? Using different words, but that's pretty clear that is synonymous.
whenever atheists speak, the same way Muslims speak about Tawheed or we speak about these things, so atheists, they speak about science as if there's a link between science and atheism, right? But historically, that's not the case at all. Yeah, historically, the people involved in science for the vast majority of human history until the 20th century, pretty much, the vast majority of them were theists of some sort or the other.
Okay, so the vast majority of them were theists. They are going to argue that science is methodological naturalism. So even if you are a theist, you are acting as an atheist when you are doing science. So in actual fact, all of these people that were theists were actually being atheists when they were doing science. And so therefore, there's a link between science and being atheist, or acting as if you were an atheist, i.e. accepting that the natural whatever's natural is the most plausible answer, and in fact, depending on your view, whether it's the only answer or at least it's certainly the most reasonable answer, and that's what you need to search for above all else until you could rule out almost anything else. Or you could show with some sort of supernatural event that in fact, some sort of theistic miracle has happened. So it doesn't matter that they were theists. You've got to then make the link that somehow because they were theists, they then put aside their exception that God did all of this and went to the naturalistic. They were just acting as atheists. So I think the claim is there in any case. But of course, he's not going to say that.
Oh, wow. So this idea that science is against religion is a bit of a red herring.
Well, okay, this is...
Actually, let me just rephrase that. Sorry, I was going to say something else. Because basically, from what I've seen in history...
Science and Islam. I think, when people say...
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Let me reverse that, if you don't mind. I'm going to reverse back, right? No.
We don't mind if you concede and make a mistake. That's intellectually honest. One of the few times that you will actually concede that you want to reword something. That's fine. Everybody can misspeak, but let's see if you do it any better this time.
What happened, you see, I think, in the past, the domain of religion was Christianity in Europe. And basically, they were so backward and superstitious and such, burning people at the stake, and they weren't allowing it, like Galileo burnt at the... Was he put on trial?
You're talking about some religious people. In spite of that, there were obviously scientific advances, like you say, Galileo, Ptolemy, Kepler, all of these sort of people, in spite of the religious opposition to this. So I don't know what you're talking about. Are you referring to the religious zealots in Europe? Okay, but that's got nothing to do with actual scientists, people who are doing science, even if they were theists or had to claim they were theists because they couldn't get any, I don't know what the word is, stops when, they paid money to do things. There's a particular word for it, isn't it, in those days? You couldn't have pitched up and said, hey, I'm an atheist, can you bankroll me? It's a version of bankrolling. I don't know what the actual word is for it.
Well, it was sponsoring.
Like a sponsored, yeah. There's a particular name that they would give it, and I'm sure somebody in the comments will tell us what it is. There's a name that when the king or the aristocracy would bankroll, scientists or painters or whatever the case is, there was a particular name they used to give to that. But kind of like you were saying, but I can't remember the actual name.
On trial,
and I'm just looking. Sorry, Rob. Let's just clarify this now. I'm just looking at this Bradley Steffens, not Stevens, but Steffens. And he is a children's book author, and he actually wrote the book Ibn al-Haytham, The First Scientist. And he calls it a biography and says that he is the one who developed this, who started this, and the scientific method is based on his work. So in this case, I have to say, yep, Sabur quoted him correctly. In this case, he is absolutely right.
Okay, and good. So obviously what we need to investigate, if any of us have got the time, is does this Bradley Steffens actually have good reasons for saying that? What does he mean by scientist? Why does he accept him as the first scientist and not somebody else? And why should other people accept that as well?
And he explains it. He explains it very well because and this is the point, and this is why I hate what Sabur is doing, because it says here, to test his hypothesis that light and colors do not blend in the air, he devised the world's first camera obscura, and this is wrong. This is definitely wrong. This thing existed for 2,000 years already, so this is definitely wrong. But what he says, throughout his investigations, Ibn al-Haytham followed all the steps of the scientific method. This is 100% wrong. So, yes, he is a person who said, we need to have experiments. We can't just go and sort of invent things out of clean air. So you need to have the experiments. This is definitely something that he said. This is what I found. But everything else is fabrication. Everything else is taking it to extremes. Everything else is saying, yeah, he followed all the steps of the scientific method. No, he did not, because the scientific method had not been invented yet, had not been, like a part of science. Science had not developed in this way 1,000 years ago. So you can't say these things. And this is why I'm always angry at people like this who go and just parrot what other people are saying without checking themselves. Because as soon as I go and look at his sources, I find he doesn't have any. He's just repeating Journal of the Islamic Medical Association of North America. Well, what are they going to say? Of course. So
yeah, it's a bit of a biased source, right? And as you say, you've got to go and look deeper. But this takes a tremendous amount of time, doesn't it?
The fact-checking
and it takes a lot of time to
case.
come over these. And of course, these guys are well aware of that, so they can make these claims. It's either partly true or it's not entirely false, whichever. And nobody else is going to check it besides perhaps you and me. You probably do a deeper job, depending on what the topic is. Patronage, thank you. Thinking clearly, patronage was the word I was looking for. So, yeah, you would be a patronage where you were given a patronage, i.e. a sum of money to undertake a certain amount of work in the medieval times. But again, we could grant this. We could grant that Al-Haytham was the most incredible scientist that has ever lived. I think that most people agree that was Newton, but let's assume that Al-Haytham is up there in the top 5. The question remains, and I hold the question mark in midair, so what? What is the point you're trying to make with this? And hopefully we'll get to that at some point relatively soon, and then we can really dig into that.
And if they were so scientifically inclined 1,000 years ago, what the hell went wrong? Why is it that today we have no output, no scientific output from any of the OIC countries? We've got 56
Well, let's hold on to that, Stops. Let's hold that point, because that's exactly one of the points to bring up. So keep that in mind, because when it gets to it, we can discuss that along with a few other things as well, because you're absolutely right. That's an important thing to bear in mind.
Some scientific fact about, was it the Earth going around the sun, something along those lines? And so,
yeah,
go on.
It's about, Galileo challenged the idea that the Earth, Galileo, Copernicus, and all these guys, we had this ancient idea from the time of Aristotle, which, funnily enough, Christianity merged with it, right? So when these scientists tried to challenge those ideas from the ancient Greeks, they were actually ostracized and they were persecuted. What's very interesting, and I really want you to note this point, is that when Muslims were coming up with ideas which were unorthodox from the perspective of what was commonly held by the Greeks, because the Greeks were seen as the gods, right, in terms of knowledge. So no one could challenge the Greeks. So even in European history, until the Middle Ages, you couldn't challenge the Greeks. What's interesting about Hassan...
Why couldn't you challenge the Greeks? Where does that claim come from? These are just claims that are thrown out there, and they're thrown out there with a level of certainty that passes for sincerity, as if this is a known fact, this is just well established. And where's the evidence of this?
The funny thing is that the canon of Ibn Sina was used throughout Europe for 300, 400, 500 years, even though it was wrong. But because it was indexed and because it was cross-referenced, it was very popular. So it was used for hundreds of years. And this is a Muslim.
Hassan ibn Haytham and the Muslim scientists is from the very onset, they were actually challenging the Greeks. And this is extremely important to understand, because when we look at the Greek ideas being challenged, the first time you see it in textbooks is you see Galileo, Kepler, Newton. However, what's missed out is 500 years before them, the Muslims challenged the Greeks on many, many, many different things.
Okay.
Allow me to share my screen for a second.
Yep.
Because they did not challenge them, they just followed
Okay,
them. You can see
so
this
this is
again
obviously
and again
not the best. We're working on a book, Failed Hypothesis. It's been going on for a long time. That's going to have proper academic...
source.
Sorry, say again?
Sorry, when it suits them, Wikipedia is a good source now, suddenly?
Well, he said it's not a good source, but he's going to bring it up anyway. I'm not sure that that's what you want to do then, but okay.
References, but still here you can
So you're going to just bring this up as a weak source then, I guess?
Yeah.
get some things. So if you look at science and you go down into what's it called, the history of science and how science developed, what you're going to find is that you first start off with obviously the Greeks, right? So the Greeks, they basically speak about testing and this type of thing, and you have this sort of proto-science going on for a while, and then straight.
Rob, did you hear what he just said? Al-Haytham is the first one who came up with the idea of testing. And what did he just say about the Greeks? They were talking about testing like 1,000 years, 2,000 years before Al-Haytham. So what the hell?
But then if you challenge him, you go, no, what I mean by testing is da-da-da-da, right? Then he'll try and qualify it after the stage, right? That's, again, one of the...
how laughable he is.
One of the tactics that are used. Make a general statement, then when challenged on it, then get specific to try and back up, the general statement that would have flown, into, the gullible ears. But once challenged, then you've got to back up so you can retreat and say, no, what I meant is X, Y, and Z. Right? This is like a backdoor technique.
Straight after the Greeks, like I said, Hassan ibn Haytham, right? He comes up. Now, if you look at the year here, Hamza, it's 965, right? That's well over 1,000 years ago. Then when you go down, I want you to know, look at the difference between that. That's 500 years. That means from this time to this time, it was the Muslims who were dominating it. And what's interesting is...
no, it's just there's a space of 500 years. How do you know the Muslims were, quote, dominating all that time? Stops. When was the split? Do you remember when the split was?
Yeah, this was in 1248.
Okay. And at that stage, the non-scientific Muslims sort of took over, right? So there wouldn't have been scientific inquiry, open scientific inquiry as there was prior to that.
But there is still discrepancy here because there is no consistency. There is no conclusive evidence that says, yes, 1248 was. But this is the date that is being taken because then Isabella and what was his name? Prince blah, blah, blah. They took over and chucked out the Muslims. And this is when they said, okay, this was the demise. And this is when Ghazali came out with his point saying that you need to stop thinking about science because it is of no beneficial value to Islam. And this is what they say. This was the downfall of the Islamic scientific endeavor.
Yeah, and you can if you think about it, that seems to me to be the more and that seems to be the more consistent view, right? If you believe you've got a book that tells you everything that's important, then why would you need to go and look at anything else, right? And if you're following, what's being told to you, and everything that's important is there, why would you do anything else? In fact, doing anything else might be, against the book. So you could always argue that somebody like Al-Haytham was in fact being a bad Muslim by going and doing things that were non-Islamic, right? Not praying 5 times a day, not following, the 5 pillars even more accurate. You wouldn't have time to do all of these other things. So one could always argue that sort of thing as well.
Yeah. Ha! Smile. I beat you by 8.5 seconds.
Kepler, Galileo, and all of these people that came afterwards, their scientific advancements would not have been possible if it wasn't for the Muslims, right?
Okay, so the claim is that it wouldn't have been possible without the Muslims. I think that claim needs massive substantiation. It's a small claim that's said in passing, but it doesn't, it doesn't miss my ears that are pricked up here. As if, the modern scientific method or even the Europeans could not have developed or done what they've done without Al-Haytham. He was, or in fact the Muslims, now it's become the Muslims, not just Al-Haytham, right? Suddenly it's the Muslims. Suddenly they are critical in the advancement of science, without which we'd still be, in the Dark Ages or even earlier. That's the massive claim that's being made here. But it's going to get worse. Hang on.
Right? Wow. So it's like Legos. It's like a building block. It's not something which can you can't build on something without accepting what's there before. Hence, also why as Muslims we also accept what the Greeks did. We don't just totally discard it. Yeah,
right.
The hardness with the European.
He's contradicting himself again. He just said they were the first to challenge it. Now he says, well, they accepted it and built on it. Make up your mind. Come on, he's flip-flopping.
Yeah, if I suddenly go quiet here, it's just because the family are home and I might have to deal with something, but we'll do the best we can.
Mindset, I'm talking about the Orientalist mindset here, is that they totally ignored our history and they just went from the Greeks straight to the Europeans, and there was like a blackout. Yeah, so that's been a big issue.
Yeah, because what I always say is that I feel that the atheists have got like a PTSD from being dominated by religion, which is Christianity at that time.
Yeah.
How many atheists were around at that time? It's not like there were millions of atheists. PTSD, in other words, those people have passed on their, quote, PTSD, to people today? Or, I mean, again, we can't take too many claims seriously here. This is just waffling, unsubstantiated personal opinion, right? Speculation of the highest order.
Yeah.
They never want to go back into that iron fist again. So they've got some kind of freedom. And the problem is, you see, I've seen it many, many times. When they try to debate Muslims, they keep kind of bring up arguments they use against Christianity about worldwide flood and all of this kind of stuff. And it's like, again, going back to the last stream we did, they need to factory reset here, because you're dealing with Muslims now. You're not dealing with Christians here.
What, for example, do the Muslims not think there was a worldwide flood?
Some do, some don't. Some say it's local.
Yeah.
Some say, well, it's very clear in the Quran that the earth opened and all the hills were covered. But it doesn't specify it the same way as the Bible does, and therefore they have a cop-out, and they're trying to say, no, this was just a local one.
Yeah, so some do, some don't, right? So again,
Yeah.
it depends. And if you want to take a view, you can make it sound like he does, that, hey, you'll pick one of those two, the one that's favorable to your position or what you prefer, and run that as if, that's the majority opinion or decision, or in fact what the Quran clearly states. Because again, like you say, we always go back to the Quran, because everybody's got an opinion. And what we want to do is go and get, the most straightforward reading of what the book actually says, not somebody's opinion, because they have a particular worldview that they want to fit the Quran into. And when you, of course, say that, they don't like that, because they're not trying to fit it. Hey, I'm giving a straightforward reading. I'm giving the most plausible interpretation. What's your standard for that? How do you determine that your interpretation is more plausible than somebody else's? Right? There's no way for them to establish it.
You can't say all religions are the same. One religion same as another, because it isn't. And like you just demonstrated, it was the Muslims.
Well, it depends on what you mean by are they all the same? Do they all worship some sort of deity that they claim is a deity? Well, most of them do. Depends which religion it is. Obviously, there's certain things. The word religion, I think, I haven't looked it up now on my top of my head, but it's along the lines of the worship of a deity. And that's what the word religion means. So in that sense, it's the same. Are there differences? Of course. But again, if you're a bull in a china shop, you're just going to make a blanket statement as if that's the fact of the matter.
MashaAllah, came up with the scientific method, the falsification test. And ironically, that's what the Quran kind of came with, because the Quran challenges you.
Oh, wait till we have a conversation around that. This claim that the Quran gives you a falsification test. Do you want to, should we do that now or do it at another stage? I mean, maybe we leave it for another time. We'll keep that bullet in the gun belt for a later time. This cavalier statement that the Quran makes a falsification challenge. Yeah. All right. We'll deal with that at some other point.
The Quran says if you don't,
Oh, he's frozen
You're
up.
frozen for a second.
Not me.
We lost you there for a couple of seconds.
Yeah, I've got dodgy internet connection today.
So what's interesting about the scientific method, the modern scientific method being developed by the Muslims, significantly developed based upon the proto stuff of the Greeks. What's interesting about that is if we, there's this book IRA published called The Eternal Challenge. Yeah. So it's written by Abu Zakaria, who I'm sure you know. He's got the channel Many Prophets, One Message. So in that book,
I'm assuming you're watching the comment there. Yeah. Let's not worry about that.
what he does is he not only looks at the history of the development of the scientific
Oh, okay.
method by Ibn Haytham, he also actually goes on to show how the methodology of Ibn Haytham is actually something which you can get from the Quran, which is about testing, which is about testimony, which is about falsification, which is about empiricism. So all of
Oh, yeah. Please do show us the verses in the Quran. Let's all read that together and see if we come to the same conclusion. Why is it, do you think, they'll never bring those verses up? Because anybody with a critical mind will see that that's in fact not what it says, not by a stretch the most plausible explanation. But hey, if you twist it, if you take an interpretation, your own version, because you want to reach a particular goal, that's the beauty of the Quran. You can make it say almost anything. And in that way, it's a miracle. Not a good miracle, by the way, but a bad one. But hey.
So all of the key principles.
Sorry, Robert, just want to point this out. I don't know if Cash22 has heard us say this. We've said this a million times. We invited all these people to our show. They have all declined. They're all afraid. They're too scared to come on our show. So we went to their show, and they told us, no, we are being blocked. They don't know how to handle us. That's why we're not allowed to go on their show. So it's not that we don't want to talk to them. I'm quite happy to talk to Subur. I'm quite happy to do that. But he's the coward. He's running away from me. And so is Hamza. And Hamza made it very clear, yes, he is running away from us. And we have it on video. So don't come to us and say we're not trying. Thank you.
Are actually there. Also, there's this interesting aspect which is very important to note. The idea of peer review, that you take people's works, you bring it together, and you systematically test it. Yeah. Now, this is a very sophisticated and difficult endeavor. Even today, a lot of peer-reviewed work is not actually accurate, and there's actually a crisis in terms of replication of peer-reviewed work. But in the Muslim world, there was this rigorous method of doing this peer review, which is not something that.
Where's the evidence of this? Do you have anything like that, Stops? I got a big question mark over this.
No.
Where did the Muslims do peer-reviewed work? And he makes it sound as if it's as good as, if not better than, modern peer review.
Yeah, but you see, this is another thing. He says, well, it's not working in science, but here it's working. But it's the same as science. So if it's the same, then it should be wrong as well. I don't know. This guy is amazing, really.
Thing the Greeks had. So whichever way you slice the onion, we're coming to the same conclusion, which is without the Islamic innovations, you wouldn't have had the Enlightenment, you wouldn't have had the Industrial Revolution, and nor the modern Western order that we have today.
Yeah, I mean, you can make this claim as if it's a fact of the matter, and we've just talked about that. So, yeah, provide the evidence. You haven't done that at all. You've made some claims. You're not provided evidence. I think we can safely dismiss that until there's sufficient or substantial evidence. In which case, I think Wikipedia then should be updated.
So why don't they use it for the Quran first of all? Just take
Exactly.
the first sentence of the Quran and do a peer review of the first sentence of the Quran. Then you will realize how stupid the first sentence in the Quran is. Chapter 1, sentence 1. Just do a peer review of that one.
Well, they've probably attempted to do it, but if you're doing a peer review, the problem with quote-unquote reviewing the Quran by Muslims is that they have a cognitive bias not to try and falsify it or ask questions like we are, but to accept it and try and explain it in such a way that they can sleep happily at night, where we're doing exactly the opposite.
Yeah, but you need to, if you do a peer review, you need to ask the question, what is this sentence trying to tell me? This is what, part of the peer review. If you do that, well, then you immediately see the problem. Otherwise, it's not a peer review. I mean, just going through the sentences, just reading it, and then putting a tick mark behind it, that's not doing a peer review.
Yeah.
At that point, there's some guy in the comments, J Mike, I think his name is.
Yep.
And he's saying he can't stay around for the whole stream.
Okay, so instead of them doing their long intro, he picked up this guy, J Mike, in the comments, so he's going to join shortly. And so they never really get around to doing the rest of the stuff because Hamza brought him in early and then all the other atheists came after that. So he'll join now in a few moments.
He seems to have a few things to say. So shall we allow him to come on to see if he can question anything that's been said so far? So at least we can underline this part. What do you reckon?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to give priorities to non-Muslims. So he's a non-Muslim, right?
Yeah, J Mike. Yeah. I've just put the link in the chat. Right. That doesn't mean everybody jump on. All right, please. This is just for J Mike to jump on because he's saying a few bits and pieces in the chat. He's not really hostile as such, and he hasn't got time to wait for the whole stream until we get to the Q&A. So I'll give him the opportunity to jump on now. So J Mike, if you see the link, I've just put it out there. Jump on. But this is not like carte blanche. Everybody jump on, please. Appreciate that. All right. So yeah. So alhamdulillah. So at least this is something that the Muslims watching so far can take away. So when the science card comes out, what do you say, Muslims now, mashallah? Yeah, we know about science. We invented it, the current method.
Okay. But listen now, Stops. Hang on, Stops. Just listen now. 1 sec before you laugh amazingly, and I was too. Just listen now. Wait 1 second here.
Alhamdulillah. Would you think that's safe to say we could say that?
I mean, look, and even if you go back to the Wikipedia article, which I'll chuck in there, but obviously we want to use more academic articles. You see, it's not as easy to say Muslims completely invented science. I mean,
Okay, so he is correcting him, but doing so in not a full-on way, completely invented. What does that mean? What did you invent? You invented some test in a certain thing, but he wants to have the claim that they invented induction, which isn't totally science. Hamza there wants to take that to the nth extreme, which is typical for him because he's got the bias of saying, hey, we invented it. We know about it. We invented it. Well, no, you didn't. And even so, we're begrudgingly saying, no, well, you can't say we invented it totally or completely. So even he's walking back the claim there. But this is, of course, what Hamza does, right? Hey, whatever our claim is, let me see if I can go to the nth degree so I can go and shout the odds as if this is the case. And all my gullible Muslims will just suddenly believe that Muslims invented science. But this is propaganda, right? This is not about being nuanced and finding out what is actually the case. As long as we want
problem
people
with
understand this, then you know when you're going in there who you're dealing with and the whole spiel that's going on here.
The problem with this is, though, that he will go to Speaker's Corner and say, we know that we invented science because Subur said it. And then Subur is in shit because Hamza doesn't understand it. And then he's going to throw Subur under the bus, who will then have to go and say, no, oh, sorry, no, I didn't say that. This is so funny. I've seen this a couple of times where Hamza will just not understand something because he only thinks black and white exists. And therefore he's then saying, well, somebody else said this, who then said, no, I didn't say that. This is quite
Yeah, I
funny.
mean, if he was on your team, he would be a liability on your team, right?
Exactly. Loose
You,
cannon,
you'd
yeah.
have to go and correct him. But that's if you're intellectually honest and you're nuanced and you want to, follow the information and the understanding to the best of your degree. You'd be sort of distancing yourself from Hamza. If he was an atheist, I'd be going, okay, buddy, you go over there. You're not the same as me. You're making massive claims that the universe is eternal because this particular model is likely true, and that's not the case, right? So even if he was an atheist, he'd be a liability. He's also a liability for the Muslims, but because their audience isn't nuanced or critically thinking, and because Sabur is not going to correct him strongly, he won't go, I guarantee he'll say this at some point. Mark my words, I'm going to make a prediction today on the 27th of October 2020. At some point in the next 6 months or a year, whenever he gets back to Speaker's Corner, at some point, I want anybody who's listening here to remember this. See if you ever pick up that he will say at some point, we invented science. Even though his buddy is saying, well, we didn't completely invent it. This will be lost on him, right? He will go to the park. He will say it at some point, either here, online, or at the park in the next year, whenever, this, either here or on the park, and he will say we invented science. Mark my words.
And that would be very hard to justify. What we would say is significantly advanced it, and the modern inductive scientific method, we can link back to Ibn Haytham and these guys.
Well, that's just your claim, right? So we'll, at this moment in time, we'll suggest that's not the case.
Even if we get down to the nuances, all that I'm trying to say, which I think any atheist will find very difficult to actually refute, is that the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the modern Western world, all of this would not have taken place if it wasn't for the knowledge of the Muslims from the East, which transferred to the West, and the knowledge of the Muslims in the East was a direct result of the Islamic Empire.
That's the part I was waiting for. This... that it's a direct result of the Islamic Empire. Firstly, what the fuck is the Islamic Empire? And secondly, even if it is, what does that mean? If it was the Quran that gave them this information, that they suddenly got an insight from God, well, now you would have something that would actually be substantial. That these guys, everybody else was a moron up until then or didn't know very much, or the Greeks were proto-science, according to Sabur. Suddenly God infused the Muslims with amazing abilities to undertake the scientific discovery. Quite why they need to do this if everything's in the Quran that's needed to be a good Muslim anyway is another point. But that might have been a substantial claim, that we could see that somehow that these guys were amazing because they invented, or came up with, quantum mechanics or whatever the case may be. But at the moment, they were inspired by but this is just a vacuous claim that sounds good to the Muslim ear, right? There's nothing beneath this. And if you dig down, you'll find he'll be making speculative claims to try and support that claim. But that for me was just one of the big speculative claims that would have sounded good, that would pass through the ears and not really land. As soon as I heard this, I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? The Islamic Empire, they were inspired by that. What does that mean? The fact that the Islamic Empire spread all over the world, killing people and attacking left, right, and center, did that inspire them? What exactly was it that inspired them, and how do you call that the Islamic Empire? These are the sort of vacuous claims that are made to the gullible ear. And to me, it's just nothing there.
The other thing that I always point out is, if there is any, like even a grain of truth here, why is it that there is not a single sentence in a statement in the Quran that is correct? Why is it that every time I fact check a sentence, a statement in the Quran, it turns out to be wrong? Why is it that no Muslim can show me a single statement and verify and demonstrate that it is correct? Why is that? Why is it? Why is it that this guy can say, yeah, it invented science, but there is nothing correct in it? Why? It doesn't make sense. It's a contradiction if you say that everything is in the Quran and there is a falsifiability check and things like that, and yet nothing is correct. That's so weird.
Yep, but they'll go and look for some obscure verse that they can maneuver to make it sound as if that's what the Quran is saying. And like I say, that falsification challenge that they have, let's wait until they bring that up when you or I are available to speak to one of these guys, and we'll see how well that goes down. But again, they parrot the same thing over and over because hopefully most people have either never read the Quran or have never challenged them on these things. The main thing take away from this, guys, if you're listening, is always ask these guys, what's the evidence for that? Because they get away with making monumental claims that they never challenged on. And if they do get challenged, then they don't have a sufficient or substantial answer to it. But because it's like they're singing to their own choir. That's what this is all about.
Right? It wasn't just incidental, right? Islam has a big emphasis on actually knowledge. There's actually an interesting book called Science of 4,000 Year History by Patricia Farah, right? So she's a historian of science from Cambridge University. So she starts off 4,000 years, so from the Greeks and then all the way to the Muslims and then the Europeans. And what's interesting is she also says this, that it's the Quran's emphasis and Islam's emphasis on knowledge which fostered the scientific Islamic advancement.
I would love to get her on the show and see if she could actually substantiate that from the Quran. And this academic thing substantiating that claim from the Quran, if it were true, I mean, we've got to take it with a pinch of salt that he's in fact accurately representing her. But if it were the case, that's the sort of person we're to get on. Show us the verses. Let's all read this together, my dear Oxford or Cambridge professor historian, and let's see whether that is in fact the most plausible reading. And could we have in fact written this better, that it would be more accurate, that there'd be no denial that that's what the Quran says? Not that we have to accept that that's an authoritative book, but at least it would have been more accurate. But that's the sort of thing I would love to get these people on our show with. And what's the chances?
Well, the problem is that a lot of people repeat the stuff without actually checking. I'm in a discussion at the moment with a guy where I said there's a series by Al-Khalili, who is a brilliant guy, a brilliant scientist, originally from Iraq, works in CERN in Geneva, but he is misinformed and he makes mistakes when he talks about the history of science and Islam. He simply did not check the sources. And if I say this, the guy's jumping on me, saying that I now need to review everything. And this is like a 1 hour video, and I need to go through the sentence by sentence and show what every sentence says. I'm not going to do that. But it shows me that there are people out there. And by the way, Neil deGrasse Tyson, I mean, I'm a real huge fan of the guy, but he makes mistakes. He says, for example, the number 0 was invented by the Muslims. Now, we clearly know that that is not the case. But there are people who will repeat this because they don't check these things. The critical thinking is not always switched on. Me too. I will also say things which I believe to be correct, but if I then check, I find, oops, like I remember I was the one who used to, 10 years ago, I used to say, yeah, the Arabs made huge contributions, until somebody said, well, name one. And I said, well, that's obvious. But then I checked and I found, this guy's right. There isn't a single thing that they invented or discovered that is significant. They just advanced stuff. But until I was asked that, I also believed that. I also parroted this. I also said, yeah, it's obvious. The same thing as I thought, well, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, they existed. It's obvious. I used to believe these things. But then once you start thinking and once you start checking, oops.
Right? So even non-Muslim historians, and of course Orientalists won't agree with this, but the ones who don't have an agenda, who look at it objectively, they'll recognize.
So there's Orientalists, quote unquote, whoever the Orientalists are, don't agree. But those that don't have an agenda, so the only ones that disagree are those that have an agenda. But of course, the Muslims don't have any agenda, and the people that agree don't have any agenda. They're non-biased, of course. Try that again.
You can't really have the modern scientific advancements that we have today unless it goes back and is based upon the works of the earlier Muslims.
Yeah, this is just repetitive now, right?
Yeah,
it's even better. I like that.
And the problem is, and Hamza, you always get this right in academia. you always get this sort of dispute and things about definition. So, for example, about Hassan ibn Haytham, not everybody agrees that he's obviously the first scientist. Some say is Aristotle.
Oh, not everybody agrees, but I'll choose the person that does agree this, and I'm going to. This is the first time he's actually says. You very rarely hear him say this. So this is probably a moment of where he dropped his guard or something like that. Yeah, because he won't normally say this, right? He'll pick somebody, and the Muslims will think that's a done deal because, as you say, the critical thinking is not there. So this is a rare moment of maybe dropping the guard.
Aristotle, but they all agree he had a huge, significant impact in terms of the development. But then what is the definition of science? What is proto-science? All of that is there. But our main argument is unaffected by these disputes. Right? These disputes have no impact on the impact.
This is the whole point. You are basing your arguments on a foundation which says it is absolute. He is absolutely right. He is the founder. He invented science. He invented the scientific method. He did all this. That is your foundation. If you go and say, no, there is some doubt, no, he just went and advanced it, you cannot make the claims that you are making afterwards because your foundation is not there. You need to understand this, you idiot. I don't know why.
And all we need, and eventually, like it's the one thing that you always say, right, which is all we need to do is eventually go back to the Quran, because that's where it has to lead to. They cannot avoid that. As much as they want to, and it looks like they want to, they can't. And when you bring it back to that, that's where the base just crumbles.
Impact of Ibn Haytham and what he came up with.
Okay, alhamdulillah. All right, so we've done the history of kind of science. Should we touch on the philosophy of science and the naturalism and such?
Yeah.
What?
So I think this is very important.
What did he say?
And what?
The philosophy of science, the naturalism of science.
What the fuck is he talking about?
Presumably what he means is that science is it uses the methodological naturalism. That's kind of what he's saying, but he doesn't really know what those words are or what they mean. So he's heard some of the key words, but like Muhammad, right? You heard a few words and then repeats it in some way, not accurately representing it.
And what I first want to do is I want to say we're not alone here. We're not alone here. When we critique new atheism, right? And I think new atheism is a joke. Right? I actually think it's a joke. People take it far. Anybody who claims to be a new atheist, I mean, I just can't take them seriously.
Oh,
so
right.
why
Okay.
are you so scared?
Well, I wanted to bring it up, and I did have it at one point, but I don't think I've got it at the moment. I wanted to bring this up, actually, about new atheism, because I actually wanted to read this out to people, and we did this all sort of last minute, but I did want to bring this up very quickly around this, right? This quote, new atheism. So I'm gonna very briefly read to you here, if that's okay. I won't share the screen, but I'll read it. This again, here's the link if you want to grab it. Heisenberg, we won't get to T-Jump today, definitely not. Unfortunately, we're going to go in order, so we won't make it to T-Jump today, unfortunately. But I wanted to quickly get to this thing with new atheism, and I'm just trying to bring it up here as I speak to you. Oh, that didn't work. I was just looking for because he seems to think that this new atheism is a big thing, i.e., some sort of everybody's part of this, or most atheists think it is. Okay, so let me read you something here. So this is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on Atheism and Agnosticism. If atheism is usually and best understood in philosophy as a metaphysical claim that gods do not exist, then one might wonder, should philosophers do with the term new atheism? Philosophers write articles on and have devoted journal issues, French and Wittstein, 2013, to new atheism. But there is nothing close to a consensus on how that term should be defined. Fortunately, there is no real need for one, because the term, quote, new atheism does not pick out any distinctive philosophical position or phenomenon. Instead, it is a popular label for a movement predominantly represented by four authors: Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens, whose work is uniformly critical of religion, but beyond that appears to be unified only by timing and popularity. So that's according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of what, quote, new atheism is. So let's hear his subjective, selective understanding of what new atheism it is.
So anyway, if we look at some academic authors today and philosophers and professors and whatnot, who are atheists themselves, who are militantly secular, who bash creationism, they bash religion, they still critique new atheism in a very vicious way, right? So I'm going to give an example of a philosopher of science who critiques it. And this is Massimo Piglucci. Now, Massimo Piglucci, he basically said about Dawkins, and Dawkins is obviously the forefather of new atheism, right? That
These guys have got this idea that Dawkins is somehow like Muhammad, right? Not everybody. So Dawkins is popular, as in like atheists know of him, but not everybody accepts that everything he says. He's good, as you've always said, stops in biology, but he may not be an expert in other fields, and that's fine. So it's not as if everybody accepts this. And if you want a straw man that it is, that's up to you, but we can suggest as a straw man, and you'll hear later on with J. Mike, that anybody that if J. Mike's position is a fringe position, right, that's some sort of weird fringe position, and of course it's a standard position that most atheists have, or at least some large subsection of them, as you'll hear from him later on. But the whole idea here is to, he doesn't think he is, but strawmanning atheists as if they all or mostly follow new atheism, and there's these four prophets that they follow, and here's this one, and here's these other atheists that are critiquing him, and so why should you accept anything Dawkins says?
That he makes a foundational fallacy, which is that he confuses methodological naturalism and philosophical naturalism, right? So
okay, so what's the point? So if Dawkins got something wrong like that, what's the point? Right, the real point, and he's made it in another video and he said it earlier, is that, because what he's trying to drive at is that Dawkins is mistaken about, you being intellectually satisfied as an atheist because of evolution. But in fact, as a fishmonger pointed out when he had the discussion, and with us afterwards, that both Piglucci and Michael Roos, two of his go-to atheist critiques, atheists who critique other atheists, they both accept that you can be intellectually satisfied. So the question is, so what about this? So Dawkins got something wrong. What's the point here? Right, but he never gets to the point here in this particular video. I wonder why.
Nice beard. I thought I was one with the longest beard, but now it's I've been beaten. Anyway, so yeah, he makes this foundational fallacy. And likewise, what's very interesting is actually David Sloan Wilson, who's a evolutionary psychologist. He actually critiques new atheism from another perspective. And again, he's an atheist, but he refutes it from another perspective, which is that new atheism itself is like a religion, the way it functions, the way it governs, and also that even if
the way it functions, the way it governs, and how exactly does it function and govern, given that there's nothing substantial about it, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia, is that there's nothing close to a consensus on how the term should be used. Fortunately, there's no real need for one, because New Atheism does not pick out any distinctive philosophical position or phenomenon. Instead, it's a popular movement. So how is it governed? Do explain that, and let the other guy that you claim to have used as a source explain that too.
Even if you accept the Darwinian story, religion is either an adaptation or it's a byproduct of something that was an adaptation. And you can't just take humanity on a journey where you take them out of a worldview in which there's meaning and drive and purpose, and you bring them.
What? Because they believe it? That doesn't make it true. And he's going to ask the question of J. Mike at a later point, right? The fact-value distinction, i.e. the Humean ought is, you can't get an ought from an is, presumably he just asserts that you can get this, like it's a fact. The fact that if God exists, that means that you have meaning and purpose in your life. No, it doesn't. Right? And you've got to argue that that's the case. So you don't get out of it by saying that God did it. That doesn't bring together the fact-value distinction any more than any other claim about it does, at least as far as I'm aware.
Bring them to nothing, because human beings, we live our lives according to meaning. Yeah, and even the meanings, even the meaning, the value, the morality, the ethics, all these things that we have today, when we speak about human rights, or we speak about the value of truth or rationality, or these things, all of these things fundamentally are a remnant, a residual of theism, right? You can't justify the value of truth or values or morality or any of these things under an atheistic, naturalistic worldview.
That's complete nonsense, right? And what he'll do later on with J. Mike is actually walk back the claim and say, oh, you can't have you can't have intrinsic value. Well, even if that were the case, so what? If determinism is true, it's an unfortunate thing that we are, fated to do what we're going to do. That's uncomfortable for it, but it doesn't mean it's not true. So this is an emotional argument to me. I'm not in any way swayed by the fact that if there is no intrinsic meaning in the universe, that doesn't affect my life. And as far as I can tell, it doesn't affect most atheists either.
So the way I see it is inescapable, the philosophical problems which actually exist with new atheism. And I think any atheist trying to defend it will be...
Look at J. Mike's face down there. He's like, what? Right? Pay attention to his face.
struggling.
Well, let's see. 'Cause if I'm not wrong, J. Mike
Yes, sir.
is atheist Jesus or something on TikTok. If I'm not wrong,
Yeah,
you are. Okay.
yes, sir. Yeah. So
Well,
I wanted to say, first of all, thank you guys for letting me on. That's really nice of you guys. Second, would be, you talked about how Islam was basically kind of the founders of the scientific method. I could go into why that's Francis Bacon and other concepts like that, but
Okay, big mistake here, right? So again, this is something for, not that he's made a mistake in terms of what he's saying, but just what it's not the content of it, but it's the fact that he said this, as in, don't offer these guys any little fish to go and jump on, because they'll jump on it and they'll go off on a red herring tangent that is trivial or that is tangential to the main point. So don't offer any information. You'll see now that they won't bite yet, but that this will be something that will come up later that they will then jump on, as if Francis Bacon is like he's got to make a big defense of this whole thing. He just said it in passing here. But again, don't say this, because all it does is allow them to turn the tables and try and shift the burden away from themselves.
But I don't want to ask you if it's the case that you have developed this kind of methodology that's rigorous and falsifiable and these kind of things. How are you using that to prove your religion true? Because it seems that if you guys invented that, why does it fail in the process of your hypothesis?
What a beautiful question. What a stunningly good question. I'm going to make a prediction. I have watched this already, so it's not really a true prediction. Do you think that this will in any way be answered?
But this is perfect, exactly.
What a lovely question. And this will remain unanswered for the next 4 hours and 10 minutes. Now let's see how they start not to answer this question at all.
Okay, I will answer you, but I've seen you do this on your TikTok vids as well. Right now, we're just establishing science, what it is, and the history. We're not saying it makes Islam true. We didn't say that just because we discovered the method of it.
So what are you saying about science? If it doesn't demonstrate Islam is true, what is the point of bringing up that you guys invented it? So what? You could also invent it. You guys invented beating a wife after, doing other things. Is that a good thing? Why would you bring it up if you don't think that it's in some way valuable to your belief system or your worldview?
So what we're doing right now is just challenging the concept that atheists have science on their side, and because Muslims obviously are religious, that we're against science. Because I see this continuously. Because I've said it.
Well, I do think you're against science. If you're going to accept your book, then your book and science are irreconcilable. So, which are you going to choose?
What is wrong with this guy? I mean, you've been talking now, I don't know for how long, about how Muslims invented science, and J. Mike is coming on and saying, well, what are you going to do with it? This is the obvious question to ask. This is the most logical question to ask. If you've been going on and on and on about how we invented science, well, what are you going to do with it? And he's sitting there, he has absolutely no answer. He doesn't even understand the question.
Yeah. Well, no, he's just not going to answer the question, right?
I've said it before. You atheists, you're using arguments against Christians, against Muslims, and they just don't work. So that's what I would say at that point.
Sure, but
hang on a moment. How is it that the question that he asked you is using something that doesn't work against? He made a very clear statement. If you guys, quote, invented science, or you advanced science, or whatever term you want to use, that because you guys were bigging up for the last 20 odd minutes, how is it that you haven't used this to demonstrate your view? And if that were the case, we'd all be Muslim, right? And the science would have vindicated you and shown that your religion is true and every other worldview is false. Why haven't you used it if it's so powerful, or if you invented it?
I mean, so if someone tells you something, do you value some form of verification on it? Or
I just want to highlight this because this will come up again. Did you hear what he said there? If somebody tells you something, do you value some form of verification? Right? Because later on, this will be turned around against him from Sabu and said, hey, you talked about value. He asked Hamza, do you value verification? Do you value something if somebody tells you something, right? So the question was, towards Hamza, do you value something? He's going to turn it around to him a bit later on and say, how do you value X, Y, and Z? Well, you brought it up, and he will correctly say, well, I was asking Hamza the question, so that's why I'm bringing it up here, so that we, again, burn this in our brain. There was a question from him to Hamza, do you value this? Because he's now talking about the scientific method. If you have this method, why aren't you better using it? And so that's where he's going with this.
Or do you not?
What do you mean if somebody tells you something?
It just tells you something, anything. If I was to tell you I swam with sharks, I mean, would you want some verification of that, or would you just accept my word for it?
If I wanted to know if you swam with sharks, but truthfully.
Sure. What if I said I flew with sharks?
Right, I wouldn't believe you.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you believe me?
Because I don't believe you can fly.
Okay. And so you would need some form of verification for that, right? I think he froze.
Yeah, he froze there.
I think you're muted, Sabor.
He's going to
Sabor,
try and come
muted.
to the rescue now.
You froze, Hamza. I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I've got really
Not
bad
yet.
connection today.
That's all good. I do too. But you would want verification for that, right? I mean, like that would be valuable to you, right?
I don't just believe things for the sake of it.
Sure.
No. So
Yeah,
I reason things out, of course.
So
My
we're
first reasoning would be, if you told me you flew with sharks, I would question, first of all, can you fly? And can sharks fly? And obviously then, if you said, yeah, I've flown with sharks, then obviously I'd question you on that, whether
So
your
the
ability
answer
to
is
fly
yes.
or not.
sure. And
Correct, right? Why? What's the difference, right? Again, and I'm sure J. Mike will ask the question similarly. What's the difference between swimming with sharks and flying with sharks? One is a mundane claim. We all know that people can swim, and so do sharks. We know of no sharks that can fly or humans unaided. So that's an extraordinary claim. So there's a big difference from one claim to the other. And that's very important, because they often try and steamroll over or ignore this point, or hope that people like us won't bring this up. But we must bring it up every single time to differentiate. It's, to use their term, this is a category error.
And this all stems with the fact that we can come up with ideas, right? We can basically imagine anything we want, right?
What?
Can we not? Can we imagine anything we want? Is that possible?
It doesn't make it true, does it?
Exactly. So you have what's called a problem of underdetermination. So anybody could tell me like any theory, right? They could go with multiple God hypotheses. They could go with maybe something that's not more naturalistic, or maybe it's a strong atheist that says like there is no God, it's only natural.
Hey, Mike,
right?
can I just stop you at this point? If you don't
Well,
mind?
no,
Okay, Hamza doesn't know what underdetermination is. So I think J. Mike is to him, it's like speaking Greek, right?
I want to just ask you real quick.
No, but you don't do that, do you?
Okay, so this is, again, just notice this is a tactic of Hamza. When he doesn't know what's going on, he'll try and bring it back to some other point, not to say, hey, I don't know what you mean by that. Occasionally he'll say that, but another tactic is, I'll just go back to something else before the part I didn't understand that was gobbledygook to my ears. I'm just going to go back before that and repeat what I said before that, so that I can erase that part, because I didn't know what you were saying, but I don't want to tell you that or get involved in something I don't know what I'm saying. So I'll just go back a step and say what I said before.
Okay. So the reason I brought you on is you were making a lot of comments on what we were saying and what Sabor was
Yeah,
What?
you're freezing, but I was gonna.
to deal with what we've said so far.
You're freezing again, bud.
Yeah, I got good connection. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, no, I'm just asking these
Yeah,
simple
no, but we're
questions
not
'cause
gonna-
we probably we agree on those.
Mike, we're not jumping everywhere. Okay, we're dealing with what's been said so far, and then we'll progress to the next stage. So what we've said so far, you came on, you brought Francis Bacon out of the hat and whatever it may be. So deal with it.
No.
See, there we go, right? He mentioned it in passing. Now it's suddenly become a big claim that they can latch onto and go off on a tangent, right? Got to be so careful of bringing up other information, because these guys are not intellectually honest. That was brought up in passing. Anybody else would have let that go and kept on the main point, but not these guys, right? They want to go off on anything you say, they want to latch onto, so they can make a trivial point and then pat themselves on the back, so they've got some, credit in the bank for when the substantial claim doesn't run through.
No. So I'm that's not my issue. It's not my contention. My contention is, if you guys are claiming that you've developed this method, why isn't it valued within your religion? Like, why isn't this being used as a method to prove your religion true?
Oh, okay.
There we go. He's asked that beautiful question again. Up until this point, of course, they haven't even attempted to go down that route. They haven't even looked at it. It's not as if they've tried to and just failed. They haven't even addressed it at all. At all.
Okay.
That's
Sabor,
all I'm getting.
Yeah, go on. Do you believe proof has to be observable, testable evidence?
Well, no, we have the a priori concept.
Yeah, when I don't know what else to say, I'll just bring up something, because he did speak to Sabur, right? But Sabur's writing stuff, he wasn't paying attention to Hamza there. So what's the next thing I can just say that will take up airtime, right? Let me go off on some other tangent.
What is Subur doing?
he's making notes here, right?
He's
He's trying
to jump in and rescue this poor Hamza guy.
No, but what he's doing, and you'll see it later on, right? He's taking notes here because his whole tactic is to try and he'll say the words himself. I kid you not. He'll say, I'm going to roast you, right? His whole point is to try and roast him. And even J. Mike himself will say, hey, you're all about trying to score points. I'll give you that one. Hey, have that. This is what I'm interested in, right? So even he recognizes it, but all he's doing there is trying to make a few notes so that he can try and roast him to make him look foolish. That's the entire point here, right?
Concepts like math and things like that. So I'm not.
What about reasoned argument?
What about what?
Do you accept a reasoned argument as proof?
It would depend. I mean, it would have to see it in a syllogistic structure and be able.
Okay, so the question there was, do you accept a reasoned argument? And he said it would depend on, you'd have to see the structure. He'll say a few other things on this. That's very important, right? You've got to qualify that because you wouldn't accept every reasoned, quote, argument because who decides what a reasoned argument is? So you'll take it on a case-by-case basis. I think that's a very good way of phrasing this because you're not just going to accept anything that sounds valid, right, or is valid, because what you're looking for is validity and soundness. Validity is the structure, so it doesn't form a contradiction. But the most important thing that we're often talking about is the soundness. Is the content of what you're saying actually likely to be true? And that's where most discussions are based.
Be able to see.
No, just for example, I've used in the past. I mean, I don't want to go into this again. We're on a different topic here, but anyway. So, for example, if someone says, "Do you believe the doctor's a doctor?" Just for example, and I've got no proof. I've never the doctor just come on as we said that. Assalamu alaikum, brother. Yeah. So basically.
Okay. So remember what he said there. Do you believe a doctor's a doctor? But I've got no proof. So if somebody in the street walked up to you and said you were a doctor, what's most people's going to say? Well, they're either going to be agnostic or they're going to be atheist if we're going to use those terms. If you got no proof and somebody says that, why? Because statistically, it's very unlikely that just any random person in the street is going to be a doctor, right? There's only a select number of doctors. You could have that view, whatever the case is. But he said specifically with no proof. Right, so you've got to be listening very closely to what they're saying, but then you've got to repeat back to them what they're saying, right? Because they will forget it, or they'll just pretend like they haven't said it. So you've got to be very careful to hang on the keywords and said, hey, if somebody in the street said that and I had quote no proof and used their words, then I'm not going to accept somebody who says to me he's a doctor. That he's a doctor, he is in fact a doctor.
He's given me no proof. He's not shown me no certificate that he's a doctor qualified to administer medicine. But my reasoning is, why would he be in that building? He seems to know what he's talking and all of these things. So I would reason that as evidence that he's a doctor. Now, would you accept that as evidence?
Sure. It's a pretty mundane claim, so I have no problem saying.
No, but it's reasoned evidence, though, isn't it? It's not observable.
So it would be the purported evidence suggests that it's likely this guy's a doctor. You could be wrong, and then if you find out you're
wrong,
wrong,
it's reasoned evidence. I'm justified in believing it, aren't I?
Sure, you could be justified in believing it.
So I'm justified to believe.
But you still could. Yeah, you could still be wrong, right?
Of course. Of course. I've justified the belief, isn't it, with reasoning?
It depends on the information. It might not be sufficient.
No, if I say I believe he's a doctor because he wouldn't be in that surgery and he wouldn't be in that position, he wouldn't know what he's talking about and all of these kind of things, yeah. Well, that would be a reason. Would that not be a reasonable position to accept him to be a doctor?
It's very important for you to tell me what it is the evidence that you're claiming, because you're kind of just brushing up.
I'm saying no.
Like he's in a building and that, so I don't really know what the evidence.
Yeah, you see, it's again very vague. He shifted, right? When in the beginning he just said, "Would you believe somebody's a doctor if you had no proof?" Then he started to qualify it later on and say he's in a building. What building? Is it a hospital? Is it a military shooting range? Is it in NASA? What building, right? So J. Mike is correct here. You've got to give me more specifics around this because people make inferences, we just fill in gaps, right? If it's in a building and he's wearing a white coat, people go, oh, that must mean that he's in a hospital. No, he never said that, right? So you've got to be very careful with this because either he's very sloppy with his words or it's intentional. I don't think it's intentional. I don't think he's smart enough to do that. So this is just sloppy way of speaking, and most humans fill in the gaps. We're just pattern seeking, right? So we won't go to the nuance and stops. You've done this a couple of times. I think you even did it with me. You've done it elsewhere where you've showed the test of doing this, how humans will, make inferences that aren't actually justified. But just because we like to fill in the gaps, we hear words and then we make an association and we automatically take it as being the case. And then when it's played back, right, and you hear what was originally said, you go, oh, wow, actually, I wasn't justified in saying X or Y.
What the evidence is.
No, the point I'm making is this. If he claims to be a doctor, do I believe he's a doctor or not? Do I need to see his medical certificate to believe he's a doctor?
If you're
let's
gullible or you have low standards of evidence, you shouldn't just believe him on his word.
Are you in the same camp as TJ where you don't trust doctors without them proving they're doctors?
Okay, I think the one thing that J. Mike could have asked is, okay, and he did ask it, right? But again, he didn't get a clear answer. But then you got to press the point. Give me the scenario in which a man is saying, hey, I'm a doctor, right? What is the scenario? Give me the specifics of the scenario, because if he's in a building, so what? Most human beings have been in a building. That doesn't mean they're a doctor. Is he in a hospital? Has he got this? Has he got an office? Has he got a plaque on the wall, or whatever the case is? You got to ask for specifics, right? Because that's the way you can judge. And I think J-Mac is kind of alluding to that anyway, right? The more evidence you have, the more likely it is that you would accept this, because there's at least a fair number of people who are doctors. But the
If he
greater
comes
the
to me in
evidence,
the street, and whether he's going to perform an operation on me, those are two different scenarios.
correct, right? So again, the more information you have, the more likely it is you can accept. But the greater point here is that, and J. Mike kind of said it earlier anyway, that this is a relatively mundane claim in the great scheme.
Yeah,
of things.
trivial,
If a human being
exactly.
says that they're a doctor and there's supporting evidence, you're likely to accept that without necessarily seeing the certificate. But again, it depends, right? What the scenario is, what the content is around this doctor saying. Where is it? When did he say it? What is exactly is happening? And that's what he's alluding to, right?
That's not. I don't think that's T-Jump's position. It's not
It
that.
is.
No, I don't think it's. So you could tell me that you have a dog, right? Or you could tell me that.
No,
you,
stay on this particular
Okay,
one.
you could tell me you're a doctor. There's
No, I'm not telling you a doctor. I'm saying that he's a doctor.
This-
It's like he's like
goodness.
got tunnel vision, right? Use any other example. No, I don't want you to use that. But he can go off on random things and make stuff up. That's all okay. But as soon as you want to make an analogy to show him why his analogy may be flawed, no, I don't want to do that, right? And that's likely because, and I think you mentioned as well, that some, if not more than some Muslims, don't entertain hypotheticals very well and can't conceptualize things very well, right? It's a certain mindset that, hey, this is what it's like you say, it's black and white, it's got to be this way, and I don't want to look outside the box. And Hamza is a perfect example of that, right? But when he wants to bring up the doctor thing or the sniper thing or anything else, well, then it's all okay, right? But as soon as you give him another hypothetical to counter his hypothetical, then no, you're not going to do that.
Okay, whatever.
Claims to be a doctor.
Sure, yeah, that's what I meant. So if this guy claims to be a doctor, I have an implicit understanding of doctors. I have an empirical basis for doctors. I know that they are
That's your
things,
reasoning.
right? So I know they're things. So there's no issue there of. So this is not analogous if we're going to.
No, it's a principle of reasoning. You've reasoned out to believe he's a doctor. You've not.
Yeah. It's just like he's going to repeat this, right? You got reasoning. I've got reasons for my belief. Well, yes, you can have good or bad reasons. You've said something utterly trivial. And the fact that you don't know the difference between knowledge and belief is another major sticking point for you. And you might get that the next 18 years of doing this. Who knows? But it's a trivial point. He wants people to agree that he's rational. And for him, he thinks this is like a gold medal. For me, and I said it when I was on the stream, this is like you're on the first step of the ladder, mate. Don't congratulate yourself that you're being rational. I take it that most people are attempting to be rational. We can demonstrate if they're not. So don't pat yourself on the back for a mundane achievement that we almost take for granted.
Hardly proven to you in the sense of empirical evidence.
Yeah, so anyone can come and tell me that they're a doctor. Am I going to believe them based on purported evidence? Depends on what the purported evidence is.
There you go. That's the key thing. It depends on what the purported evidence is. That's at that point we're done and we move on. But not with our brother Hamza here.
That's what I'm saying to you. You're going to reason it, aren't you?
Yes, you are going to reason it.
That's it
what
then.
I'm-
So
that's what
according
I'm
to you,
saying.
accepting the principle that a reasoned argument or a reason is enough evidence to believe something to be true.
What is your point? Where are you going
There you
with
go.
this?
A reasoned argument is enough to believe something is true. Well, it depends on what the reasons are in the context and the amount of evidence, because reasons are based on some evidence, whatever the evidence is, right? And he just wants him to agree that as long as you've got reasons, then you can believe something. No, people believe things for bad reasons as well. So it depends on what the reasons are. I mean, I don't know how many times you have to repeat this, right? But again, right, when you have and you've got to just understand the mindset, and unfortunately or fortunately, I do understand the mindset of Hamza, right? There's a particular conclusion. And whatever nuances or anything else is in the way, it's like snakes and ladders game. For him, it's like I'm going to go from 1 to 100 straight up the side of the board. I'm not going to go along the side. I want to get to that 100, and all I'm going to do is get to that 100. If I have to break a few rules, I don't mind about that. I just want you to say X because my outcome is for you to agree with me, even though it's not a nuanced position. So you just got to understand what's happening with these guys here. They have a position and all they want to get is agreement or to refute you. That's it. There's no nuance here. There's no, let's see if that's in fact the case.
You're going to do what? I'm sorry, I don't know if I got
Okay,
that.
a reasoned argument is acceptable as evidence to believe that something is true.
If it's sufficient. You have to have sufficient
But
evidence.
who decides the sufficiency?
Well, this is why
It's a
hypothesis is
situation, you
necessary. This is why this is why I was getting to the underdetermination problem. We could say
Okay, so he mentions underdetermination again, but this is sort of over Hamza's head. So, he's not really going to track this.
No,
could have
and-
multiple
and
different conclusions, and we
need
can make
to learn
multiple
from
different
this,
arguments.
When you automatically, when you have a situation like this, you need to go back and ask them, are you now trying to attempt to show how science is going to be used or has been used to verify your religious beliefs? We need to always go back to the original question, because he's
Correct.
not doing that. He's allowing Hamza to walk off into the countryside with him now.
Yeah. Because this was a red herring there because there was silence and Zabur didn't jump in to help him out. So he just came up with the next thing, in his mental script that's in his head. What else can I ask here? Or what else? How do I
also
fill the
do
time?
this. I react exactly like J Mike. I go along with it. I don't stay on top of things and say, okay, where are you going with this? Can you show me how this relates to my original question? Can you answer it yes or no? Because Zabur is not interested. He can't answer. Imran doesn't know what's going on. Hamza is incompetent. And this is what we're having at the moment. Now, sitting here in my armchair, brilliant, I can see this. But I know when I'm in the situation of J Mike, I make the same stupid mistake.
The one person that you can model that is actually almost too good at this is ask yourself, AY. So he was the guy that was on the other stream along with Jack Angstrike, right? He is like a terrier. He will not let go of the original question. He'll just keep asking. Sometimes Hamza does that as well. But ask yourself is the most tenacious, like I say, even sometimes I go, okay, that's like pushing it, right? So that will tell you how tenacious he is. That's the sort of thing you've got to do with the original question. Because when he brought this up, as you say, J. Mike could have said, well, how's that relevant to you demonstrating why you haven't used science to show that your religion's true? And that would have brought because da-da-da-da. Okay, but how does that relate to this? And you just keep asking that question to keep going back there. And that's something that somebody like Ask Yourself is like I say, almost too good at doing. You just won't move on until you've answered that original question, to the point where people get so frustrated they kick him off or they won't continue a conversation. So it depends how tenacious you want to be with it. But you're right, that's something you've got to keep. How do we get here? Because what was the original point, right?
Arguments, but you could come to a conclusion, I could come to a different conclusion that's entirely contradictory.
I know, but my
so that's
question
why
is
sufficient
one.
evidence matters, because we could still be justified in our conclusions, right? Because we have a limited form of evidence, but that's the problem of underdetermination,
No, but the point here
which
is
is why
this.
sufficient evidence matters.
But my question again, I'll repeat it. Do you accept?
All of that has just gone right over his head, right? That is such a valuable point to have there, that you can come up with multiple hypotheses, and the more evidence you have, the less chance that you're going to minimize the number of hypotheses that are going to fall away, because certain evidence will falsify certain hypotheses, right? Otherwise, you could have multiple conclusions for the same evidence. So if you looked at, there was an empty tomb, well, either Jesus got, beamed up by aliens, he resurrected, or somebody stole the body. There's multiple hypotheses there, but we don't have enough evidence to show what might have happened in that particular case.
Accept a reasoned argument as evidence? If you don't, you don't.
See, everything else went over his head, so he just goes back to the previous question. I didn't understand a word this guy was saying. It was over my head. Let me go back to the original question, and I'm just going to repeat myself, right? This is a tactic. I just keep repeating myself until the person gets tired or just agrees with them so that they can move on. And then I pat myself on the back because I'm the lion of Speaker's Corner, because I'm able to repeat myself and not actually have a nuanced or intellectually honest conversation.
It depends on the context of what it is, but sure, I can give it
course
as
it
part
depends
of
on the
the.
context.
It is part of the evidence, but it's not sufficient evidence to warrant the conclusion. But it is part of the evidence.
So what, there's no empirical evidence for it, though?
If there's no empirical evidence, then it could be true, but I have nothing to go off of, so I'm not going to accept it.
Well, then you would fall back on the reasoning, isn't it?
I would say just like in the position of religion or God, I'm not convinced that's the case, and therefore.
No, I know you.
They don't want him to go near God, right?
Yeah, but I don't understand why he's constantly harping on about his reasons. You can't just use the word reason without bringing some sort of contents into the fact here, into the matter here, because a reason is based on something. Just because you use the word reason does not automatically make it right. I understand what he's trying to do, because he's always on about, well, you have to question my reasons for something before you can show me that I'm wrong. But he doesn't understand what he's talking about. And the thing is, just bringing up the word is not going to help you, because you need to understand that the basis for a reason has to be something. It needs to be a
Correct.
fact. It needs to be something that you are basing your reasoning on it. This is why somebody once said, a very clever man said, if you take a belief that is based on reason, the reason in itself is again a belief. And this
Yep.
is what you need to understand. And this is what this Hamza has no.
But the other way you can do
not a
this, Stops,
chance
as
of
well.
understanding.
The other way of saying this is, hey, would you agree that people can have bad reasons for believing something? So if they can have good reasons and bad reasons, then having reasons alone is not sufficient to warrant a belief, right? Because he's all about reasons, but people have bad reasons for believing things. So, and as J. Mike's saying, you need something else other than just, quote, reasons. What do reasons rest on, right? Something else. It's not just that you manufactured a reason, and some people do, but you can have bad reasons. So, and oftentimes people do. So it's equally applicable that you can have bad reasons. So just harping on that you can have reasons for a belief, because what he really wants, right, the ultimate end goal is because, and he said it himself, is that he wants to be reasonable and rational. And so everything goes back to that, right? There's this predetermined thing. So if I have reasons, quote unquote, then I'm reasonable. No, that doesn't mean that's the case. You don't conflate reasons with reasonableness, because you can have bad reasons and then you would be unreasonable. But because that's the end goal, he thinks reasons equals reasonable or reasonableness, and that's not the case, right? So you just got to know where he's driving towards as well. And it's a bulldozer effect, right? I'll keep repeating the question, and hopefully I'll get you to say something that I can then take as saying, yeah, I accept it. Just like he said at the beginning, right? Those other three atheists, they all agreed that Darwinian evolution doesn't disprove a God, right? In his mind, he didn't hear the nuance, or if he did, he's just completely dismissed it because there's a conclusion that he wants, which is, hey, Darwinian evolution doesn't disprove a God. Same thing here. He wants to be seen as reasonable. So all he has to do is keep saying the same thing until the interlocutor gets tired or simply agrees, or he can just take a soundbite and go, okay, well, that's it. Let's move on now. Because he's playing to the audience, not for an intellectually honest conversation.
I know you're not. Don't worry about it.
But I'm just showing that that's the position I would have.
No,
I would
but
say,
I'm just
I'm not
establishing
convinced he's a doctor, but he could be a doctor. I would need more evidence to prove
Do you
that.
believe a doctor's a doctor without him proving to you he's a doctor?
No.
That's okay. So he said no very quickly, but he is going to qualify it here. And I actually stopped here because remember, that's said without context. So do you believe he's a doctor? Who's a doctor? In what circumstance, right? There needs to be context around this, which is why Mike said immediately no. But now there'll be a moment of silence here, and that gives him a chance to qualify it. Because in his mind, likely Mike was thinking, if you're painting a hypothetical where somebody says, hey, I'm a doctor, because that's all that Hamza said there, right? Then you'll later on start to add things or bring things in. But if he's in a building, well, you didn't say that in the beginning, right? So you've got to be very careful with these guys. Yeah, you've got to be very meticulous. It's not easy in the heat of the moment, and especially if you don't know these interlocutors. Like, fortunately, we know them so that we know these tactics.
Hijab was trying to do this to me when he said, yeah, but you see, rational is equal to reason. I said, no, it's not, and I'm not going there. I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole. I'm not going to take it. And he got very frustrated, and he tried to repeat it, exactly what you're saying, using the same strategy,
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, if I go to a doctor's, if I'm going to a doctor's office,
yeah,
and he has a PhD and he works at the building,
how do you know
right?
he's got a PhD?
That would be.
He's now added in evidence to show that if this were the case, now I'd be more likely to believe he is a doctor. What is Hamza's response? How do you know he's got a PhD? He's pointing out a hypothetical. You were okay pointing out your hypotheticals earlier on. He didn't question the critique or the context around your hypotheticals. He answered directly. Now, when he brings a hypothetical to show you that, hey, when these things happen, I'm more likely to believe it, your response is, how do you know he's got a PhD? This tells you that he's on a different wavelength, even if he's on some wavelength. To ask that question is like, where are you? You're not even paying attention. You don't understand at all what's going on here.
Well, if he's purported evidence. Your initial thing was that he's at the building and all these different.
No. That's the reasoning side of it. You just said you want.
This is mind-boggling, isn't it? It's like you want to put your head in your hands, and it's like, how can somebody come on here with a confidence, with the Dunning-Kruger effect, that he's a good interlocutor, a good debater? The fact that you don't have the introspection to stop and go, hang on a moment, how can he? He just. And this is the case, right? And Hijab demonstrated the other night as well. When you don't know a topic very well, and words can come out of your mouth, you don't have the ability. And some people don't, right? They just don't have the ability to introspect and to go, hang on a moment, let me go and reevaluate my position or whatever. They just don't, right? They're automatically right by fiat and everybody else is wrong, as long as some words come out of their mouth that remotely sounds like it could be coherent. That's all they need here.
I don't think he's on a wavelength. I think he's flatlined. But I saw Sabur unmute himself, but he didn't say anything.
No, he's going to jump in now in a moment, but I think Imran's going to jump in as well, even though he's only been in for a short time, because he likes to come in and try and summarize things and, of course, not necessarily get it correct. So I think that's coming shortly as well.
You won't believe he's a doctor without proof.
Yes, that's part of the evidence. He's at the building. He's,
Right,
he's doing things. That's why it depends on what he is doing at the building.
Right. So the point here is this: how do you know he's got a PhD?
It's a hypothetical, Hamza. He can say, hey, I saw it in his office. Hey, I walked past the reception and there's all the PhDs on the wall. I mean, he can tell you anything. This is a hypothetical, buddy.
If he's working at the building, I can presume based on induction that he has the degree, right?
But that's reason. That's not proof.
Deduction, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but that's reasoning.
Yes, it's called deductive reasoning. This is like basic philosophy. I don't see what the problem is.
Anyway, so, Bo, you respond to his initial thing about why what his claim is this: if we believe the scientific
He
method,
didn't make a claim. He asked the
Okay, so
question.
Sabur's intent now is to try and catch a J. Mike out, right? And he's going to go back to the Francis Bacon thing and others, right? And that's why I say you got to be very careful what you say. So let's listen into this, quote, line of intellectual argument.
I was taking a few notes because he said a few things. Firstly, thank you, J. Mike, for joining us. I want to chronologically go through the things that you said. So before we get to underdetermination and what Hamza was pointing out to you, that you're actually using reason rather than using empiricism.
That is empirical data. You can't reason out of it. It's not a priori. It's a posteriori. Like you can't deny that.
Okay, so Hamza wouldn't know the difference between a priori and a posteriori. One is, believing something or having knowledge without the reason. Some is after reasons. So like post and pre, in a sense. Go on.
J. Mike is turning the tables, because now he is taking what Sabur is claiming and saying, yeah, but hang on, you're saying this is not actually correct. And he's correcting him, which is what Sabur is trying to do to J. Mike. J. Mike is doing to Sabur. So this is quite clever.
Yeah, and he will correct him multiple times as we go through here. And there'll be some moments where you're like, holy crap, right? And I'm going to point those out when they come up.
Yeah, but testimony that you actually get, that being a source of knowledge, do you accept that?
Yes, it's empirical. That's part of the empirical basis.
So testimony being a root of knowledge that undermines actually scientism. You recognize that, right?
No, scientism would be that only science can answer things. And I've already said conceptual knowledge a priori. I've already said that. Did you write that in a chronological order? Because you will see that I said that.
No, I don't think you understood what I said there.
Okay, so Boer's claim here is that if you have testimony, it undermines science or scientism. That's the claim that he's making, and J. Mike is saying, no, it doesn't necessarily do. What are you talking about?
The idea that scientism, which is that science is the only root of knowledge,
which is what I said,
is challenged by the idea that you just subscribe to, which is testimony.
No. Wait, subscribe to testimony. That part I'm not understanding what you're saying.
Okay, let's go through each.
Because that's not scientism. Would be that knowledge it can only come through virtue of science, through the methodology of science. Yes. That's not my position. My position is that you can't have a priori knowledge. I've said that like 4 times, so I'm not understanding.
Okay, so let's go through each point at a time, because I think it's very important. So firstly, you said, this is one of the first things you said, instead of science being developed by Ibn Haytham, it's actually Francis Bacon. Now, Francis Bacon actually...
I did say Francis Bacon.
What did you say, Roger Bacon?
No, I said Francis Bacon. I'm a computational biology major. I know who Francis Bacon is.
Yeah, I think he just misheard Sabur, right? Sabur did say Francis Bacon. I think he just misheard him.
Sorry, I don't understand what you're saying.
Nothing, just continue. Nothing, go on.
In the beginning, you dismissed Ibn Haytham, and you said the scientific method was developed by Francis Bacon.
I said you could point to guys like Francis Bacon and other guys, but let's just for the sake of argument say that yours is true, because that doesn't matter to me. Even if you guys proved it to me today that Islam came up with the scientific method, cool, it doesn't mean anything. The same way it wouldn't mean anything.
Okay, so he's just granted that even if this was the case, he just said it in passing, if we remember, right? That's why I highlighted it at that stage. He just said that, hey, Francis Bacon, if you look, he's credited with induction. They actually talk about it being in the induction where I didn't see anything where that was credited to Al-Haytham. Right, but he just said it in passing. That I think was the mistake. But he's happy to grant that, hey, you guys quite invented science, or you guys did X, because his real critique is, well, if you guys invented this, why aren't you using it, right? That's what he came on for, essentially.
It's not critical.
anything to you of Christianity.
But watch what happens now. Sabur wants to make a trivial point. He wants to harp on about this because, and he's going to use the word roast you in a second. Watch.
You know,
No, J Mike,
it doesn't.
I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. The first thing I want to highlight is that there's a 700-year difference between these two. So Ibn Haytham, his influence led to the Enlightenment thing.
I know, but you're talking about stuff that I like. No offense, guys. I don't care. But this has nothing to do with religion or anything. I don't care about that. I'll just concede. I'll grant it for you that Islam.
J Mike, if you don't care about it, why did you just blurt it out in the beginning? It had nothing to do. If you don't really care about it, and you don't want me to refute you right now and show that you're 700 years late.
I'll just concede it. That's what I'm telling you. I'll just grant it for you.
You got to speak. I'm speaking now.
I'm granting it for you.
So if you I'm going to roast you before I grant this to you. Yeah.
No, I'm
Okay, I'm going to roast you on a trivial point that the guy is granting you anyway, because I need to look good in front of my audience. I haven't actually been saying anything of value up until now, really, or I've been speaking to the choir. But I remember what we said at the beginning, but I do want atheists to come on and challenge everything we say. But I'm going to roast you on a trivial point that he's prepared to grant you. He said Francis Bacon in passing. He didn't know who he's dealing with here. In future, if J. Mike is listening or we ever get to chat to him, don't bring up any information that they could possibly use as a red herring to come back at you later on with.
I'm granting it to you just for the argument.
You can't just turn up to a live stream and I've picked out some points here, and then you're like, oh, no, ignore that point. Let's go to another point.
He's granted you the point. He's not saying
exactly
ignore
what
it.
you
He
can
said
do.
he's granted you the point. Have it.
Exactly.
Whatever. He
So
wants
what's
to
your
move
problem?
on. No, my problem
his
is I want to
question?
roast him. I want to keep making the point so that I look good, and so that my gullible audience will just cheer in there, because they wouldn't know the difference between good and bad argument if you gave them a roadmap and a manual. But I want to assert the point multiple times over and over, even though he's granted it already.
Now what I want is J. Mike to say, can we get back to the question now? Are you going to answer my question? Or are you going to harp on about Francis Bacon?
I can do that.
Late. You're 700 years late. Ibn Haytham was 700 years earlier. Now, the other thing that you said was about value, right? So do you value?
Okay, remember what he said about value? Do you remember why I highlighted it earlier? He said to Hamza, just as a reminder.
Value evidence. That's all he asked.
Yeah, he said, do you value evidence? I think that was the question. Yeah, it was a question to Hamza right in the beginning.
You value truth as an atheist?
So why are we going to valuing
No,
truth?
because right in the see, I know you don't want to go down.
I do. No, I value models, right? I don't make proclamations of truth. I make models that represent reality. That's how science works.
You mentioned value, not me. You're the first guy to mention it when you came on this
Yep, and he mentioned it with regards to a question to Hamza.
stream. Straight after Francis Bacon and Ibn Haytham, you spoke about valuing truth.
Can you see how he takes trivial points here that he can try and use as a gotcha later on? He's not here to answer the original question that he came on with, which is even what Hamza said, hey, Sabur, at one point when Sabur wasn't paying attention, because it's like, okay, Sabur, you give him the answers to why we aren't using this method if we invented it, right? So they'll never get an answer to this. But let me bring up some other trivial points, which is exactly what he did with Fishmonger as well, right? With Monkfish. Is he'll go to trivialities that Fishmonger, for example, and J. Mike are not disputing at this moment in time. They're not interested and they're not disputing it. But I'm gonna ride these trivialities because, hey, I've got nothing else.
Yeah, but doesn't he realize that this is a declaration of intellectual bankruptcy? Doesn't he understand that?
I don't know, Stops. I don't know whether he realizes that. I'm of the view that he doesn't. I think that was the view of Fishmonk as well, that he just doesn't realize this. He thinks that these are important points.
Okay.
What? No. So valuing
Do you value truth? Let's get to it. Do you value?
Listen, I'm going to explain it to you real quick. Science doesn't make proclamations of truth. I'm not saying I have proclamations of truth. I have things that represent model of reality, right? So that's anything in science. It's evolution. It's part of the reason why you guys don't understand how science works, it seems, because these are models. That's why. And you talked about falsification
I'm
earlier.
asking you a direct question. Do you care about truth?
Yes, of course I care about truth. That's why I do shows
I'm
and things.
talking. Don't interrupt me. I'm talking. Now what is he doing? Exactly that.
Yeah, well, interrupting, of course. I mean, it's a double standard all the time, right?
That I do, but I'm not saying that I can get to truth. I'm saying that I'm trying to get models to get to.
J. Mike is trying to explain himself, right? But Sabur is not interested in the explanation, right? He's not interested in this. His view is that, and he's going to say it now, right? And this is just mind-blowing. Listen to this.
As close to certainty as I possibly can.
That's true. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Now, valuing truth, can you justify that, please?
Can I just?
Okay, so what he's actually asking is here, can can you justify valuing truth? It's the is-or distinction. We talked about it earlier. I'm not convinced that you can bridge the gap between these two. It's the Humean thing. So my answer to this, I'm not convinced that the is-or distinction can be reconciled. But I can give you some of the reasons that I personally, and speaking to other atheists, why we value truth. But he didn't say it, right? And he's now going to make a distinction later on because he didn't make the distinction now. He's going to make it very shortly when J. Mike answers the question. Listen to this.
And justify what? Truth?
No, can you justify it as an atheist, as a materialist, as a philosophical naturalist, somebody who
Hold on. I'm not a philosophical naturalist.
Okay, so a couple of things here. You go first if you like, Stops.
What
Go
an
on.
asshole.
Okay, so a couple of things here. One is he says, can you justify this, right? Then he gives him a whole bunch of criteria of which J. Mike doesn't subscribe to. Because in Subu's head, most atheists are X, and therefore this atheist, J. Mike, must be part of that. And instead of asking J. Mike, hey, are you X, Y, and Z, to find out what his position is, because then you can actually speak to him about what he believes, not about what you think all atheists or most atheists are supposed to believe in your sort of model of the world. So it just goes in with, can you as da-da-da-da, and he's immediately, well, hey, I'm not that sort of guy.
But he
Why are you
tells
strawmanning me?
him-
I'm a
He tells him as a philosophical naturalist. He has not said anything about that.
Correct.
This is shocking how dishonest and outright, low this Sabur guy is. He is being a real asshole here in that he is now insinuating something that was never mentioned. He is telling somebody, you are this, where he has never said anything about this. This is okay, I've never seen anything like this before. This is so dishonest, unbelievable. I'm really
Hang on, it's going to get
disgusted at
worse.
the moment.
It's going to get worse.
Oh wow.
Methodological
Are
naturalist.
you an atheist?
I'm a methodological naturalist. I'm not a philosophical or metaphysical naturalist. That's just a straw man. You're just wrong.
So
That's like me, Sabor. That's like me saying, so since you're a Christian, like you're just being wrong.
are you an
So,
atheist?
but are you an atheist?
Atheist does not entail, if you guys
I know-
think
I know
atheism
that.
entails philosophical
I know
naturalism,
that.
you need to go back to philosophy class. I'm just letting you know.
Hang on a second.
Thank you.
So do you believe
It's
in?
embarrassing.
It's embarrassing for you right now.
No, it's really embarrassing for you. You
And-
literally just said you're an atheist, therefore you're a philosophical naturalist. I can point you to
Most
more
atheists-
methodological naturalists that are atheists than philosophical naturalists.
Are philosophical naturalists. Most atheists are philosophical naturalists.
Okay, either way,
That's bullshit.
nobody's got the, who knows, right? So J. Mike might be talking about anecdotal evidence. He might have evidence. If Sabur claims that most atheists are philosophical, again, where's the evidence for this? Show us the polling of some sort, because I think both of them are going by anecdotal evidence, right? But either way, it doesn't make a difference. What's important is that he characterized J. Mike as a philosophical naturalist instead of asking him, what sort of naturalist are you? Because what he really wants is for some sort of answer to the, why do you value truth, which is the fact-value distinction. They are distinct categories. And the problem is, like I say, I don't think it can be reconciled, but the problem is they can't do it either. What they have is a story that, hey, God told us that there's truth and he told us to value it. That's the story that they provide. And as Ozymandias said in one of his videos, and I think I had that recently as well, this is just a story. This is just a claim. This is completely uninteresting. This shouldn't affect or impress anybody else about your story. No, we don't. If you could demonstrate that your God existed, and in fact that he had objective morals, and that he had instilled, this valuing of truth into you, then you might have a point. You're light years away from remotely getting close to that conclusion. But you can ask anybody else.
That's a ad populum fallacy. I don't care about what most atheists are. That's not me.
Let's
That's
ask you,
Okay, that's the key point here, right? He's speaking to him, and Sabur has this idea that most atheists are like X, right? And he's actually going to make this point now. And J. Mike is saying, hey, speak to me, ask me what I am, and I will respond to you. I'm not going to, defend a position that I don't hold.
Yeah, but
Do
this
you
is
believe-
the same
do you believe
as though saying
in,
you're a Muslim, so you're a terrorist. It's the same thing.
Yeah, or you're a Muslim and you believe that Ali was the first caliph. Most Sunnis are not going to accept that.
terrible.
Or if you're Shia, you accept Uthman or whatever, right?
that there is something beyond nature.
I have no access to that if that's the case. I'm not denying it.
Okay. So what
See how
is
you're straw manning me now?
I'm not strawmanning you. I'm trying to understand what your position is.
Now suddenly
No,
he's
you're
trying
not.
to understand his position after steamrolling him and lumping him with a position he doesn't hold. Maybe he's suddenly got the message to try and, quote, understand his position. Well, let's just see if he does try to actually understand it honestly.
Because right in the beginning, what I'm really trying to get to is when you came in, you made a few statements and you wanted to run to the next, run to the next, run to the next. Now, just before you joined on, I said something very important. I hope you are listening. As an atheist, you cannot justify valuing truth, because under an atheistic worldview, truth and the value of truth and morality and ethics and all of these things are meaningless and baseless. So when
No.
you turn up,
What
This is utter
are you
nonsense.
talking about?
I know. But what he's going to do later on is now make a distinction between instrumental and intrinsic truth or value or whatever the case is. He doesn't make it here, right? He thinks he can bulldoze this over. And I would have said that as well. But even if that were the case, well, let me get to that. We'll get to that in a minute.
when you turn up, well, let me complete. When you turn up and you say that you care about truth, what I'm making, and I'm making a strong claim here, and I want you to try and shoot it down, you cannot justify that under your worldview.
Okay, this is one thing, by the way, that we've got to be careful of, right? Especially with Sabur. He'll make a claim and then get you to respond to it. No. If you make a claim, justify it. You made a big claim that we can't do it. Why should I accept that? Right? Too often, they do this. They make massive claims, and then the atheist or the interlocutor, because they're dying to respond, they want to say, no, that's not the case. We've got to train ourselves and remember to say, you made a claim. What's the argument or evidence for that? And keep them on that. They made the claim, right? But he does this a lot. I'm going to make a big claim now, and I want you to refute it. I want you to respond. No.
Rob, I just fell for it.
Say again?
I just fell for it.
Oh, you did? Okay. Yeah,
I
yeah.
wanted to immediately answer the question and say,
Correct.
no, because no, it's exactly what you are saying. I should say, look, are you now asking me to justify your claim? That is
He wants you to
exactly the
rebut it,
response,
right?
But it's built in. It's the knee-jerk reaction that you want to. If you get a question, you want to answer it. And
Now,
you
if you're a
shouldn't.
Muslim, yeah, exactly, right? And if you're a Muslim listening to this, imagine I did the same thing. I said, hey, I want you to, I'm going to make a very strong claim here, and I want you to refute it. All Muslims are terrorists. What do you think a Muslim's going to do? The first thing they're going to do, most likely, is because now there's a huge claim. They're going to say no, right? They might say provide your evidence, but most of them are going to try and, like you did now,
Exactly.
Stops, try and do the
I
same
fell
thing.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so easy to do, right? Because you want to defend. I mean, such an absurdly ridiculous claim that he hasn't remotely justified. But as we see, this is par for the course with these guys. They make massive claims that they can't defend. And when they get on with people that do understand the particular topic, I'm not saying I'm the expert, but people like the other night, then they're completely out of their depth, right? Or Skydive Full, or whoever it might be, or Jack Hangstrike, then they're out of their depth, right? But most often they don't encounter people like that. And like you say, people will then try to defend it. And then their claim goes unanswered, unsubstantiated. And that's the whole point.
Don't get emotional.
Yeah. That's the other thing, right?
I'm a moral realist. You're straw manning me again. So you're telling me something is
Did I mention moral realism? Did I mention?
Well, you asked him to
He
value.
did. Oh, fuck.
Yeah. So what he did is say, can you prove or can you demonstrate or I think it was prove that you value truth, right? So now a moral realist is somebody who believes that there are moral facts in the world, in which case they feel like they have reconciled the fact-value distinction. So for him, his particular position, if I understand it correctly, is that he doesn't need, he still has to justify that, but he already is that, he already has that position.
I mention anti-realism. I'm saying something different.
you're saying it's meaningless when I'm a moral realist. What do you mean?
Can I just say something, guys, just very, very briefly?
This is
Carl Controllers, hi, guys. It's very clear that what seems to be happening to me, I'm just coming, apologies if I'm misunderstanding anybody, that it's clear that we haven't established what everyone else believes about their own positions. So this is what some things are coming up as people, you feel you're being strawmanned or not. Now, actually what's happening is, in a haphazard way, we're trying to understand where each other stand.
So if you want to ask me, you can ask me, hey Mike, are you a methodological naturalist? And I'll say yes, right?
So just give me a moment. So I think what's really important is if someone asks you a question that they're applying generally, don't take it as a personal thing, because obviously you have to get to know each other before you know what the positions are.
Okay, well then please use that same advice to your buddy there and say to him, hey, before you go and make bold claims, ask the person what it is they believe or what's their position on X, right? But you hear he doesn't do that part of it. Sorry, I'm going to take a call, so I'll let it run for a moment.
Okay. So but it's really important to actually hear each other out because we're trying to come to an understanding. One of the things that, I came and I just heard a bit before when I was in the background. You mentioned about if you value the scientific method, why don't you use it in your religion or you don't value it within your religion? And I think this is where you use the term value. Now, suppose trying to establish something. So I think don't take everything as pejorative or strawmanning you. You can clarify when he's finished that, actually I'm not a physical methodological naturalist. I'm not a physical
Can
naturalist.
you,
Just take it as sort of good intent.
I get that, but the main problem here is
so can you take over here, Stops? I will
Where are we?
come back in a sec. We are at 41:33.
Okay, are you going to be back, or should I just sort of end
Yeah,
it
no,
after 2 hours? Oh, it is 2 hours.
Oh, it is 2 hours, is it?
We've
Okay,
done 2
is-
hours. This is why, if you want, we can take a break and do this tomorrow.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yep, that sounds good. Probably not tomorrow, but maybe Thursday. Yeah.
Yes. Then we've,
All right,
we've covered the
fabulous.
first 2 hours. We're at 41 minutes.
41:33,
Imran
yeah.
tries to now, I don't know, summarize something but makes a mess of it. And then we can take it from there, because I think 2 hours is a good timeline.
Brilliant. All right. I want to thank Stops as always. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. We'll be back again whenever we have an opportunity. And we'll come on with part 2.
Cheers, guys. And if anybody has questions, ask them.
Thank you and good night.